being live streamed. So no, he can't do that.
That's a great note to start on the live stream.
But
well, so
we're dealing with some lag issues here, so we'll just have to make it work given our sporadic internets. But how's everybody doing? It was fucking great to see everyone at the conference, by the way. Let's start with that.
Oh, dude, so good to fucking see you guys. You know, like especially when we were hanging out at that party, I was just like, yeah, this is the shit right here. Like, this is the best. I was thinking about that party because I'll just say we were at the Michael Saylor barbecue or whatever, and we were like hanging out on his yacht with, which is like fucking bizarre, everything. But I was thinking to myself, I was like, the Bitcoin journey has been really interesting for me. It's like, okay, I started speaking my mind when I found Bitcoin, and I no longer get invited to family Thanksgivings. Okay, that's a ding. But I do get invited to billionaire barbecues. Okay, that's interesting. It just.
Well, it makes you think of Peterson's
it wasn't
thing,
barbecued
right?
at all. It was just like catered and people passing out shit.
That's true.
That was legit though.
There was a barbecue down in the back. You had to line up for your burger and your steak and shit.
Oh yeah. All right.
You were right next to it,
John.
You were right next to it. Yeah.
I'm just like
too busy talking to the prince.
Cramming my crazy shit down the prince's throat. Yeah, I like halfway through, like me just talking insane shit. Somebody's like, "Hey, you realize that's like the prince of Serbia, right?" I was like, "No, I just thought it was some random dude I was just talking my insane shit to."
Well, you seem to be having a good time.
The journey, because yes, Hodl, same thing with me. Like I just kind of started spouting all of my craziest shit, and for a long time I was just isolated, and everybody was like, he's been huffing a lot of paint lately, so like stay back from him. But like now people are like, no, like tell me more, and it's a little fucked up too, because like I'm on this intellectual journey where like I feel like I'm losing my mind. People are like, no, like keep going, like go farther, and I'm like, but I feel like I'm losing my shit, and they're like, yeah, like keep going.
You do it so we don't have to.
I feel like it's getting wackier too. It's better now, finally. Jesus Christ, it was fucked. That last night after the remnant dinner, I was absolutely.
Yeah, you were speaking at like 5x volume the whole conference, but I didn't want to. I mean, it was glorious.
If you ever lose your voice at a conference again, you got to get these things. Fisherman's friend lozenges.
Classic.
You get them at CVS for $2 or $3. They save your life.
I came home with I got
bring your voice back from the dead.
Still have it a little bit right now. Like Bitcoin Tina was like fist bumping everybody to not get sick, and I was like, "Fuck it, come in, give me a hug, man." I was just hugging everybody. Of course, I got fucking sick as shit.
Man, it was much better than last year. I was laid up with the Rona for like 10 days, near death last year after the conference. This year, I just had a bit of a come down and a sore throat.
Yeah.
Pretty mild.
Bitcoin events are super spreader events. It's okay. We can admit it.
Well, but we're all like bouncing around our immunity between each other, so that's why because I feel like last year a lot of people were fucked up afterwards, whereas this year people were like a sniffle or two, but that was it.
Yeah, it was. I just wanted to extend it, but that's what makes these things special. Is like they're time limited, but especially when we were all hanging out at the barbecue, like there was a hard stop on the time of that barbecue, and it wasn't the right time or place to do one of these, but it's just so good to be hanging out with everybody, you guys, and then everybody else who's mostly awesome. And it's when I got to Miami and I brought Dad, it really feels like coming home in some weird way. Like when you hit the conference, I know there's all sorts of shitcoinery and all that kind of jazz, but like when you meet like the core people, like when you meet the people that super well, like it just feels so good.
Oh, dude, I was talking about this. I was talking to Jeffrey Swan, who's Guy Swan's brother. A lot. Some people know him. Yeah. Not as many people do, but super early OG Bitcoiner. And I was talking to him and Guy, and I was just basically like, we used to Bitcoin in the dark, like meaning like it was just a bunch of us on our computers, like writing back and forth to each other. Like you didn't know who was on the other end of the computer. You didn't know what you were, and you were just kind of trying to search through ideas, and you felt very alone and isolated. And the Bitcoin price was much lower. There was much less fanfare. Like anytime it was mentioned on like a libertarian podcast, like we knew about it, right? But we didn't know each other because we were all kind of nervous and scared and paranoid to like actually meet each other in person. Some people were going to meetups early on. A lot of people were not, because it was not best practice to do so, right? And so we were all staying on and blah, blah, blah. And then we like did that alone for like 5 years. And then we met each other and it was like this fucking cathartic, like, brother, like oh my God, like, yes, like. And I think now we do a lot more Bitcoining in the light. Like we're at a big conference in Miami and everybody's hugging and kissing and being like, I love Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin's the best. Like we didn't used to do that back in the day because we thought the government was going to make it illegal at any point and we'd all be fucked, right? So we didn't want to advertise that we had Bitcoin or whatever. And Bitcoining in the light is certainly like a much better experience and phenomenon. But I do have to ask myself, is it worse for, I don't know, like the individual Bitcoiner journey? Because doing it in the dark by yourself was such a fucking crucible. And you really had to be hardcore and principled and have a fundamental analysis of it to get through that time period. And now if you show up at the party and it's just all good times, is it going to be as easy for you to like hodl through the tough stretches? Because like there are more tough stretches coming. It's not going to be all just, yacht parties forever.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't think it is the same experience though. Even if you didn't gain that conviction through hardship, I feel like it's not the same experience if you don't de facto have that. So like when we're talking about seeing everybody and the big hugs and having like just this big giant love fest, I feel like if you're one of the people that feels that with everyone else who feels that, you're probably ride or die. Like, it's like you'll go down with the ship or you'll go to the moon. Like, and I hate that terminology, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's not just like, oh, this is a cool little counterculture. I feel like being a part of this. This is fun. Like, I feel like the feelings that we have with one another and that we meet like our real homies at the conference. Like there's definitely an unspoken thing going on there. That's more than just like, I'll be a part of this thing now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Now you could be right. I mean, maybe there is a future where, which Eric continuously reminds us of, that we might all be black bagged in the future. And maybe we don't want to be so public about all this, but for now it's pretty fun.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, it's scary. Like, I think we're in this like interesting lull period where we're like, yeah, like we're winning, like we're gonna take over money, and like the pro Bitcoining going on at the conference is really interesting for so many people to be like, yeah, I like Bitcoin, like buy my shitcoin. Like that was literally my mantra. I was like saying to myself, I was walking around, I was like, I like Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. I like Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. And it's provided a great cover, but I really do think that
what do you mean?
Like, even one, like
you were saying that to people? Like, what do you mean? That was your mantra?
No, like as my mantra internally to like prepare myself for those encounters, because like that would keep like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, I love Bitcoin. Like, have you heard about my NFT thing? And I was like, oh my fucking God, like kill me. So like that was just like the mantra I was saying to prepare myself to it, not to cultivate it. But it's provided a great distraction. But I mean, the powers that be are going to like recognize what's going down at some point. They're going to be like 6102 motherfuckers and like black bag them. And like, I don't know. I hope I'm wrong.
Maybe,
but like, I just
maybe.
Like, I can't just see the powers that be like, oh no, like we lost. You got like, I guess the Bitcoiners win. Like, come on in, guys. Here's the White House. Like, John Vallis, tell us what to do now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys heard Neil Katyal speak. There was a clip of Jimmy Song reacting to Neil Katyal after, which people might have seen, which was fucking, I mean, it's just fantastic, right? It's like we have this constitutional law, like Supreme Court lawyer, and he gives us his best take, and then Jimmy Song's like, that was a bunch of bullshit. Fuck this guy. Fuck everything about it. It's like, welcome to Bitcoin, bro. But he basically gave this false presupposition, I thought, which was, he was saying like, you can't use property right, like free speech and property rights as a defense against regulation from Bitcoin. And my thing was like, nobody's saying that's a defense against regulation from Bitcoin. We're saying that's a defense against an outright ban of Bitcoin. So like for me, when we talk about like getting 6102 or whatever, I don't think there's a legal precedent or an ability or a pathway for them to outright ban Bitcoin but certainly there is a lot of room for them to put all sorts of terrible regulations and attempt to co-opt Bitcoin. And that's what we need to be girding against. I think people are sometimes confused about what the fight is. That's the fight, is not getting dystopian regulation.
Yeah, I agree. But it's also the case that a lot of wealthy and powerful people are starting to fill up their bags with this thing. And that's a huge line of defense, I think. You know, who knows how all this is going to play out, but you got to be pretty much retarded in the world today not to be buying Bitcoin. And, you know, most super wealthy people are not retarded. Like there's some obvious examples, you know, but from my interactions with people in that class, you know, political or financial clout over the course of, well, my life, and then over the last in Miami, a lot of people are getting this now, and it's going to be tough to regulate against those people because they have a lot of clout with regulators, and they're in the room for the conversations with people who write the laws or put forward laws and regulations. So, and this has always been part of, you know, the defense of Bitcoin, but I don't know, maybe they will just let the Trojan horse walk right in, and, you know, we'll just wake up 10 years from now and it'll basically be a fait accompli. That's the idea.
I'm curious,
that's the hope.
Rob, because you did your thing with Jordan. I'm curious how much you feel like you know, with like 100%, he's like full orange pilled, ready to, like, you know, ride or die kind of thing. And I'm just curious where you think he's at, because I know that you did a good job kind of getting him backed in, but I didn't hear kind of the conclusion of what your thoughts were.
Congrats, by the way, on that. That was a massive coup.
Well, thank you. And thank you, John, for opening. Thank you guys for your support. It was a long time coming together, but it seems like it worked out well. We're going to be releasing the episode soon. So I don't know where he's at, honestly. Like, it seems one of the things I like most about Jordan, I think a lot of people like about him, is that he really tries to be hypercritical about things, really tries to take arguments apart, doesn't accept things at face value, right? Really does the deep inquiry, I guess. And it seems like with Bitcoin, he's kind of taken that position, that he's, you know, attacking it from multiple angles in his mind, but hasn't been able to really find the chink in the armor, as most of us have been through. But he also, I guess, you know, one point he said was that he thought if it succeeds, the implications are just so radical that lends him to believe that it has a small probability of success. So I don't know exactly what's going on between the ears for Mr. Peterson, but it does seem like he gets it. Like, he gets it enough to know that separation of money and state would be a really, really big deal, would really reorganize the hierarchy. But it seems like maybe he's plugging a gap in his economics understanding, where we think there's a lot of economic incentives and pressures that drive the success of Bitcoin over time. You know, we talk about them a lot. I don't think he has that clarity, perhaps. Sorry, it says my internet's unstable. Hope it's coming through all right.
You're good.
But anyways, yeah, I hope that the conversation at least gave him a little bit more of the orange pill. I don't want to comment on one thing Eric said. You're talking about the powers that be. We talk about that a lot, but I think we have to be careful there, because it's very easy to just put that in that aggregate, the powers that be, in one collective whole. And in our mental model, we think they move in some coordinated fashion, like it's one big, you know, Leviathan we're fighting against, but it's not really. It's just all these factions of interest that are divided amongst themselves as well. You know, like, I think it more of it like family dynasties and you know, political factions and things like that. Some of them that we draw a line around and say, oh, this is the United States, but it's really, you know, who owns the shares in the central bank and those types of families that matter. So this whole idea of there not being the powers that be are not a single indivisible whole, right? It's groups of people competing amongst themselves. And when you throw in the asymmetry of just holding Bitcoin versus attacking Bitcoin, I guess the thesis I have on that is it starts to tear those factions apart. Like the economic interests that held them together like glue, it's like all of a sudden they have to start buying some Bitcoin, even if they're hedged against its success. You know, as I've described in some of my writing, where like if you're a central banker and you think Bitcoin has a 1% chance of success and you need to allocate some capital into it, even to just protect yourself as an insurance policy against it. So I think as Bitcoin starts to permeate those, I guess, call them private factions more deeply, it just the incentives change them, right? So I don't know. Maybe it's naive optimism, but I don't think we're going to have this unilateral onslaught from the powers that be. I think the powers that be are just going to get dissipated by Bitcoin over time.
One can hope.
I have often like conceptualized power as sort of like a table, right? And like the powerful people are sitting at the table. And I think that every generation there's sort of a revolution for who gets to sit at that table, and it takes different forms. And usually the best you can do in any given revolution is you can get about half the seats at the table. And I think that's sort of where Bitcoin is heading, because like one thing that we don't often talk about is it's very fun to like throw out lava, have fun staying poor at a Fiat billionaire on Twitter or whatever. But like they have the ability, if they're smart, to port their wealth, their fiat wealth into Bitcoin. So it's just, when do you decide to join the Bitcoin story? If you never do, you're going to lose your seat at the table. If you do halfway, you're going to, maintain your seat at the table. And if you do it early, like a Michael Saylor, you're going to have a much larger, seat at the table, basically.
Yeah. One of the things I was at, a couple of dinners throughout the course of the week, and we're not talking about like the top of the power hierarchy, but, a powerful table. And one of the things I remarked at the end of the dinner was that we can often not even fall into the trap. I'm sure it's sometimes the case that like powerful people sit around that table looking to divide up the world, right? Like, they're trying to, this is yours. They collude in various ways, whether it's the oil people or the top political central banking cartel, whatever. And I kind of remark, like, we're sitting around a table like somewhat similar to that. And the whole topic of our discussion was, how do we bring this tool of peace, prosperity, and freedom to more people in more parts of the world more quickly? Like, that's what we were conspiring to do. And I just had to say, like, it's fucking beautiful that that's what's happening here, at a table that outsiders might think are, the select few trying to do everything to divide up things for themselves.
Well, and
that's nice to hear, because
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's nice to hear, because I think particularly with this sort of socialist rhetoric that you're given, there's always, as Robert was saying, there's like a they and like the ruling class. And I think that really, even if you don't believe it, like that still can kind of pollute some of your thinking, that you can think, well, like if somebody's got hundreds of millions of dollars, they obviously kind of need to think that way. But hearing that kind of reassures me a bit more of that, like, no, like they're sort of caught in this mess in the same way. And I think what's even more interesting is that, like, now there's this very important precipice in front of them of like, okay, like I gotta like take my, $300 million and figure out like how to get that all into Bitcoin and selectively allocate it in a thoughtful way that like, I'm also not hampering my general business operations. And, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really keeps me, like turned towards the light in terms of being like, okay, like maybe we can actually like win this in like a pretty bloodless coup kind of way. So it's nice to hear.
I think that one of the things I often think about is, I was just reading it in the MIT Technology Review, and it was basically saying that, crypto's a failed revolution. And it's mainly talking about NFTs and Web3 and stuff. And like, it's saying that crypto is a failed revolution because, really like these new technologies are just, they're pushed by the people who already have power as a way to further consolidate their power, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think that is true in air quotes crypto land, right? But it's not necessarily true in Bitcoin land. Like, here's the part that's true. Everybody in Bitcoin land is driven by greed, by human greed, right? But the Bitcoin system has judoed our greed for benefit of the whole, our individual greed for benefit of the whole, which is the beautiful way in which the invisible hand in capitalism is supposed to work, right? And so it's like, when you look at, people say Bitcoin's incentivized by power. all right, sorry, Bitcoin securitized by power. It's not really securitized by power. It's actually securitized by human greed, because it's a computer system in which the incentive is to make the system stronger rather than attack the system. It's the first one that's like that. And it's the only one that's really like that. You know, there are often attacks that happen in altcoin land, right? So yeah, do I have some marginal human greed in order to get you into the Bitcoin system? Absolutely, right? But do I think that getting you into Bitcoin makes your life more prosperous? Also, definitely yes. And I also practice what I preach. So I'm not dumping on anybody. And if this thing fails, I go to fucking zero too, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
You
like,
know, like,
is that actually greed though? Like that stuff. This is the stuff that I find really fascinating. Is that,
Yeah,
like,
that's an interesting question.
it's hijacked and like inverted it, because while like, yeah, like there is that component that exists kind of as the baseline. Like, I don't think any of us are here doing all of our crazy shit just because we're like, haha, like number will go up more.
Right.
Like I think we realistically understand that, like, this is greed insofar that, like, I can see deep into posterity that, like, this makes the world like a better place for like everybody across the board. And like, that's my quote quote greed. But you know, at the end of the day, like it's really a beautiful human endeavor that not only do we see this, but we're participating in a meaningful way towards it.
I think it comes down to time preference. I've thought about this a bit. Like, I think in the short term, let's say if I bought Bitcoin at, you know, 200 and flipped it at 400, or, you know, whatever, 20,000 flipped at 40,000, like, yeah, that would be greed, right? But like over the long term, if I really seek to be long-term greedy, I end up creating a better world most of the time, right? And so then do you reach this philosophical conclusion that your greed has transformed into something different? And I think maybe the answer is yes. I don't know what the word is for it though.
well, I mean, the question is kind of like, where is the line between self-interest and greed? Right. And I think maybe that's like somewhat of an impossible line to answer. But what's interesting about the differences in
property.
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 That's the line.
Yeah.
That's the line. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Well, so you're only greedy if you attempt to gain via the violation of other people's property. You're not greedy if you attempt to gain as much as you possibly can within the confines of your own without violating property. Is that the line for you?
You guys hear me again?
Yeah, we got you. You're a little late, but we got you.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I would just, the series I did with Max, the Ethics of Liberty by Rothbard. I mean, Rothbard has laid this shit out pretty clean. Granted, it's not a bright line. The line between, I guess, persuasion and coercion, or, you know, as you said, self-interest and greed, it's subtle in some respects, but he goes through actual jurisprudence of what it would look like. You know, he's going through like boycotting and bribery and blackmail and all these different edge case situations where you're like, well, was that persuasion? Was that coercion? Was that greed? And he's managed to make a pretty compelling case that there is a line to follow that's, you know, person and property. So the theory there, at least I think, in capitalism is like everyone should pursue their own self-interest, maximize their own self-interest within the limiting principle of other people's private person and property. So long as you're not hurting anyone or stealing from anyone, you want to maximize your own profit and net worth. And that actually means, like, if you're doing it within the bounds of private property, that you're actually maximally enriching the collective in the process. Because if I'm running a profitable business, it's not violating anyone's property rights. That means I'm solving a lot of fucking problems very efficiently. So not only am I getting rich in the process, but I'm also selling that knowledge into the market. So it's not, I mean, it's somewhat abstract, but it's also kind of intuitive in a way, I think.
No, I think that's a fair response. What I was going to say about that is what's interesting, because we talk about this Trojan horse and, you know, the wealthy and powerful people maybe starting to get on board. I think at least a part of that, what I've been picking up is that, because you don't want to be a billionaire and not have a flourishing, you know, dynamic economy to, you know, be a billionaire in, to have all the nice things that being a billionaire affords you, you know. So you don't want to be so greedy such that you break the entire system. But if the system is breakable and corruptible as it is now, then it's almost inevitable that enough greed, you know, and corruption will at some point corrupt it and break it down. And I think a lot of those sort of people are starting to realize, oh shit, like we might be at the point where I need to consider the system rather than solely my own wealth, because we're at the point where it's breaking down, and I want to be a billionaire and have lots of options, not be a billionaire and have everyone coming for me and have no options. So I think this is perhaps part of the reason why they're focusing on something that might be an alternative or the next iteration of the system, i.e. Bitcoin, and why they, and I agree with, in the Bitcoin system, like, how should we define greed? I think that's probably a good line. The question that comes to my mind after that is the person, like the ascetic, right, versus the person who is, providing a service and, trying to become wealthy as a result of providing value to the market. What is the differential there? And this probably gets into the idea of value or values, but like, what is the difference in approach into the accumulation of things to the self, right? Into one's approach to their own self-interest between an ascetic and a highly driven entrepreneur? Let's say, just to use an example, like Elon Musk. I'm sure he's not perfect, but like, let's say he's just driven to create and build and innovate in a market. What do you think is the difference between those two examples?
And the first thing that comes to mind is, Socrates was notable for his poverty, and he basically made the point that in having no possessions, he was free from any influence whatsoever. But I don't like, okay, that makes sense if you're fucking archetypal philosopher Socrates and you're trying to just philosophize to the max, right? You don't want anything diluting you from that. But that doesn't work for most the rest of us, basically. So, and then if you look at an Elon Musk, we did, or he was in that clubhouse room, I don't know, it was like a year ago, maybe. He was saying his life, like, it's like, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's really hard. He's basically, we saw this with Saylor too, like they're running a small country, right? Saylor gets out of bed, he's got fucking 2 personal assistants, 10 house staff, security guards, 2,000 employees. Like, a lot of expectations are attached to him. So that's clearly going to be pulling you a lot of directions, right? Whereas Socrates clearly doesn't have to deal with any of that. But Saylor is also solving real problems in the real world in a way that would increase the human treasury of knowledge, presumably, and benefit us going into the future from at least a purely economic or pragmatic standpoint. So it just seems like, to be purely pragmatic, again, 99.9 infinity% humans need to follow the entrepreneurial path, at least to some extent, or work for someone following that entrepreneurial path versus just being this possessionless ascetic philosopher. I just don't think most people would do that.
I think what's interesting is how these two kind of actually connect, because like in the concurrent world, like, the Michael Saylors and Elon Musk, like, yeah, like it's got to be hard to like have this shitload of money, have all these employees, like need to be constantly iterating to like create more cash flow. And because you're fighting against this system that's always losing money, like that's the only way to continue to acquire wealth. Whereas like when you go back to a hard money standard, like if you've actually had a family dynasty that like has any fucking logic about it, they've been able to save up money in a meaningful way so that like if you choose the aesthetic like life of Socrates and want to pursue those things, it actually becomes a realistic possibility again. Whereas like, any of us who had our grandfathers like leave us a decent amount of money in bonds or whatever, like we're just fucked on that. And so they're, like this is the thing that I think is so interesting about modernity is the way it captures all of us, and we're all supposed to play the money game because of how fucked up money is, and it becomes about cash flow. And so like now renewing the world by going back to a hard money standard that's free, fair, global, and transparent for everybody, I feel like these things actually get married back into each other because, now the possibility of the Elon Musks and the Michael Saylors, like if they want to exit, there's a meaningful possibility to be able to do that in the same way that there's a meaningful possibility for somebody to start saving their wealth in Bitcoin and know that that's going to be an accrued savings over time, as opposed to the infinite evaporation of it as the concurrent system wants from us.
This maps on somewhat to the point Peterson made in our conversation. Was he does see clearly that fiat currency inflation essentially is penalizing prudence, right? If you're the saver and you're the smart capitalist and you're stocking away a lot of savings and capital and solving problems, well, then you get fucking wiped out by hyperinflation. Like it tilts the incentives the opposite direction from which you want them, obviously. So you're in that situation, it's actually more practical to take on a bunch of debt and consume and all of this, which is not at all what we want in a truly advancing civilization. And I think this is why I've been beating this drum about fiat currency as self-deception. Like if you look at it from the scope of humanity, we've been trying to take the path of least resistance or get something for nothing. And it's always been a very alluring or tempting proposition to just print money, right? Especially when you're in the position to do so, even if it's just at the margins initially, it makes things look better. It's stimulative. It fucks with our nominal valuation of the world, where we see nominal value going up. We think things are fine, right? I've got more dollars than I did yesterday. I'm better off. But that, again, so Mises tied all that to the boom and bust business cycle. That's the Austrian business cycle theory. But we've also had boom and bust of civilization premised on that. So it's like a bunch of really smart people get together. We have a hard money standard. We solve a lot of problems. We create a abundant civilization to greater or less extent across time. But then the corruption sets in, right? There's problems. There's little busts along the way, and we try to cover up those busts by printing money. And then it starts this reverse down cycle. So we've just been, it's like a drug. We're like drug addicts. We can't resist this idea of just print the money, and solve the problem and move on. But ultimately, it's humanity, cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Well, what's interesting about this is that self-deception actually, concurs a lot of advantage in evolutionary game theory. And so basically, like if everybody in the tribe is supposed to go look for food, and you come back, you go jerk off in the woods, and you come back and be like, dudes, I looked for food really hard today, right? Like, but you're a bad liar. People are going to kill you, right? So you have to become a good liar. And in order to become a good liar, you have to truly believe that you looked for food. You're like, I didn't jerk off on that squirrel. No, I looked for food all goddamn day. I'm a hard worker, right? And the truth is, like, you didn't, right? And when everybody in the tribe goes off and jerks off in the woods and then comes back and says they looked for food, you have nobody bringing food home to the tribe, and then the tribe starves and dies. So too much self-deception in a society. You can have a few actors act this way, but when too many people are acting this way, you're going to have systemic collapse every single time.
Well, there's this really interesting balancing too, where a self-deception can be sort of the first step towards like the real proof, just like fake it till you make it. So maybe you go out in the woods and you like beat one off. You're like, oh, all right, like now that I got that out of my system, I can like go hunt concentrated, because like I'm not thinking about like banging out, that hottie back at camp. And like now that you're like focused, you like get the deer and you come back to camp, you're like, check it out, I like killed the deer. I'm like, hey hottie, like check out my deer that I got. And now you get to go bang her out. But I mean, like this is really interesting, because like we have to ask like Satoshi Nakamoto, when he produced Bitcoin, like was this a self-deception that like he had to force him? Because like there's that great quote where he says he had to like build the entire system first before he could convince himself it could work. And in a lot of ways, like you have to imagine like what kind of crazy shit was going on in his head as he's making it. He was like gonna make a new global monetary standard that's gonna save humanity. Like at what point did he like stop and be like, what the fuck am I doing? Like this is absolutely insane. And he's like, well, you know what, I'm a dog. Like nobody believes I can do any of this shit anyway. So like back at it. And luckily Hal was like, I like this Satoshi guy. He's great. He's like, doesn't even know I'm a dog.
It reminds me of that quote from Customato, who was Tyson's trainer, which is, that the hero and the coward feel the same fear. It's how they respond to that fear that defines them, right? So it's basically like, yeah, maybe Satoshi, it's a crazy fucking thing to think you're going to architect a new monetary system, right? So it's like, you kind of do have to be a little bit self-deceiving in order to architect it. But then, maybe that self-deception causes you to actually do the work to engineer the new monetary system, right? Like, I don't know. It's hard to get inside Satoshi's head. Like, I like to think of him. as like an alien, you know, who just descended with like we'll
Well,
never know.
it's a really good point on how anyone permits themselves to do anything in the face of like the enormous humbling magnitude of the mass that is global culture and your experience of reality itself. Like, who are you to try to pursue any meaningful or valuable ends? And I think we get into like a discussion, or this is at least partially the function of like hero stories and stuff like that, and the values and principles that are elicited from them, to say you can't always connect all the dots to, you know, whatever end you're desiring, nor can you always, you know, you may not even be able to rationalize doing anything, but there are, or any outcome rather, like pursuing any particular outcome. But there are certain principles by which to orient your behavior, to foster your behavior. Let's say an orientation towards what is beautiful or good or truthful or honest or liberating, and pursue them, and let the road of outcome manifest itself accordingly. And perhaps acting in that way is the best possible way to constitute your action or your aims. And this actually goes back to the question I was asking about like the difference between the ascetic and someone like Elon Musk, because I think at least in part, both are pursuing liberation, right? So the ascetic is saying, I'm going to relieve myself of desire of all forms of impediments, whether they be thoughts, physical manifestations, whatever. I'm going to do my best to eliminate any impediment that I have towards my liberation, my connection to the divine God, whatever you want to call it. And that's one approach. Let's say the billionaire approach is, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to seek liberation through maximizing my optionality through space and time, let's say. And, you know, there has been schools of thought throughout history that kind of think the former is more valid and the latter is some kind of illusion, right? Like the Cathars in southern France in, I don't know, the 700s or something like that. Like they kind of had the perspective that like the physical world was like the devil, right? And so you should kind of renounce all that. And that's been a theme that's popped up throughout history. But like, one, I don't want to believe that. And two, I don't think I do believe that. Like, I don't think pursuing creativity or creation in the world, like novel creation, exploring God's creation, if you will, is inherently bad. It's all about how you go about doing it, right? And so for me, you know, as I've been exploring this idea a lot with you, Eric, of like what constitutes right action, how to go about applying yourself toward manifesting the results of right action in your life, and what is like the back and forth between the, you know, the liberation you might experience from nodding yourself, like self-nodding, like annihilating the self, versus almost amplifying the self such that it's able to pursue liberation in a different domain of consciousness or the world. And the former, I think, is easier to establish because, you know, people have had mystical experiences or meditation or, you know, transcendent love or whatever it is. The latter, because it involves interpersonal interactions, is more difficult to maybe ascertain or like develop a certainty around how one should, orient their actions or what they should pursue in that domain, because there's so much subjectivity to it.
I think it's funny that you say that, because I think there's probably, I don't think most people.
Hodl brought up.
Oh, go ahead, Robert. Laggy.
Oh, sorry, I might be lagging.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, I liked how Hodl brought up the hero and the coward both feeling the same fear, but it's ultimately the choice of how they respond. And this is one way that I've actually been thinking about responsibility, right? The ability to respond effectively. And the guy that, you know, there's a difference here. This is the reason I think communism is inferior to capitalism ultimately, because capitalism has private property. And we often say private property rights, but something else I talked to Peterson about, like every right is a responsibility, as he said. So when you have a private property right, you're simultaneously and commensurately responsible to take care of that asset, right? You get to enjoy the benefits that it creates, but you also have the responsibility to take care of it. So the guy that went and jerked off off the squirrel instead of hunting food, like that only works in a communist environment, right? Where there's some social contract and expectation that everyone does this thing, and then they come back together, and he could just abdicate on his responsibility and say, well, fuck it, guys, I still get to eat because I looked for food, and you have to take me my word. But if he was operating in a capitalist environment, he'd be going hungry, right? His P&L would have a hole in it, and he would have to delay some gratification of some sort. So, it's this idea of property again. We're back to it, that it's the implementation of rights and responsibilities in a socially coherent and equitable manner. I guess it's just consistent with like whoever does the work that others find valuable gets the rewards, and whoever does the work that others do not find valuable or does it inefficiently suffers the losses, right? It's just skin in the game. So, and the stronger ultimately we make that line, like the stronger property is to violate, the more expensive or risky it is to violate, let's say, the more you're creating an incentive for people to just go and do work, smart, good, efficient work, versus if property is not so expensive or risky to violate, then many people will just adopt that strategy, right? Like why would I make anything or take entrepreneurial risk, but I can just let others take the risk and I'll take the fruits of their labor, which is effectively what statism is, right? And so I think to John's point, the ascetic and the entrepreneur are both seeking liberation from scarcity, ultimately, as we all are to some extent. But scarcity is, again, it's wherever demand exceeds supply. So the ascetic is basically saying, fuck this, I'm going to reduce my demand to zero, reduce my desires to zero, right? I just want to wear rags and eat enough bread and water to survive. Whereas the entrepreneur is trying to increase supply, right? They're actually trying to create wealth, create abundance. So it seems like maybe that's the common thread between the two. Like they are both seeking liberation, but I think it's liberation, at least initially, from economic scarcity. For the ascetic, maybe that then transcends into other forms of liberation, spiritual liberation, selfhood, self-actualization, whatever. The entrepreneur ends up just getting very rich by increasing supply. And then they have to figure out the same thing. They're still in Maslow's hierarchy. Like, they get all their basic needs met. Maybe they live very luxuriously, but then they still have to go out and find purpose and meaning and something to live for. And, that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Saylor is I think he's actually living for this movement. It's not just, he didn't need to do this. He didn't need to take this much risk. He didn't need to put this much skin and or soul in the game, yet he does. So I think that's something worth admiration.
Something I wanted to bring up was, John had made this point about, you basically give yourself like permission, to change your life. Like, and I think that's been the hardest thing for me is like in orange pilling people, like people don't want to give themselves the permission to like have a better existence, basically. And I'm curious about you guys and like how because at that moment of like first purchase of Bitcoin, you're essentially like giving yourself permission for a different life, like the audacity of hope, you know what I mean? Like, where does that like come from? And like, how was it for you in your experience?
I mean, for me, like this shit's like the craziest possible thing that could result. Like it was pretty much like my life fucking sucks. I hate who I am. There's no exit at all. I live in darkness and I'm absolutely fucked. Here's this like nascent like magic internet money that like I don't really understand how or why it's functioning, but like I get people can buy drugs with it and like not find themselves in prison. So there's like something working here that's important. And so I take my first bite and I'm like, oh wow, this is like pretty good. And then like I start eating more and I'm like, oh, this is like really fucking good. And then like I start looking at it more, I was like, this is more than good. Like this is like the ultimate and infinite nourishment. This is like the fucking apple of knowledge. And like it's just been a descent farther and farther down in there. And for me, this last conference was so incredible. Cause like, I just like laid my fucking bananas crazy shit out there. Where I was, you know, like so many times I go to people, I'd be like, you get that Bitcoin's the return of the Messiah on earth to like reunite humanity to like a global collective where we all have like a fair opportunity to utilize money as a shilling point to like organize us to move away from violence as a means. And they're just like, yeah. I'm like, oh, like you realize like that's fucking insane, right? And they're like, yeah, but you know, I get it. I was like, oh, okay. Cool. So what do you think about that? They're like, yeah, it's cool. I like it. It's good. I'm like, okay. So I mean, I don't know. And like I honestly believe at this point in time, like we are part of a very important class of small people who will be remembered throughout the rest of human history as like the fucking crazy people that helped introduce and spread the gospel of a new and good form of money. And it's very bombastic for me to say that, but like, I don't know, like I keep reading all this crazy philosophy because to me, like this, I'm just trying to figure out if this is true. And the deeper that I go and the more complicated philosophy I get to, like each time it just resonates deeper and deeper to where I'm like, okay, I guess like I'm not fucking insane. Like I am insane, but my particular brand of insanity was like the sort of magic that was needed for me to extricate myself from this darkness. And so like, I literally believe at this point in time that God made me crazy. So I'd invest in this thing to extricate myself from my life circumstances. And that like my purpose now is to fully commit myself to my idea of who and what God is and what his intended purpose is for me on this planet, which is talking about my insane belief that Bitcoin not only is the Messiah to reunite humanity, but it's the best option that we have to make a beautiful world that is beyond the darkness of fiat. And people seem to like it. So, hey, why not?
I must be even crazier than Eric because everything that comes out of Eric's mouth, I agree with.
Yeah. I mean, for the first thing we have to say about like assessing one's insanity is what the fuck are you comparing it to? If you're comparing it to the mass of the world outside, then I think you should, you know, be pretty gentle or like be pretty flexible with yourself because that's a really bad sounding board to use for your own insanity, you know. But the question then becomes like, well, because we're talking about our like what is a rational or reasonable or truthful perspective to have as a human being, basically. And that, you know, that question goes all the way down to the deepest philosophical pursuits or the deepest religious or theological pursuits, which is why Eric, you, Hodl, you, Rob, you, me, we all are pursuing those lines of thinking and reasoning because that's the question. You know, basically, what is truth? What is the most reasonable thing that I can use to orient my perspective towards truth in the world in the best way possible? And that's been the question forever. That's what everyone wants to know. And what do we make of this thing that's emerging in the world that is a representation of what seems to be the best principles by which to orient that perspective or to construct that perspective? You know, and I think part of the reason, and, you know, I think we've all talked about this privately, but like the Messiah was the word made manifest, right? The word made flesh. Those primary principles transmuted into a person such that other people could witness it and learn from it and, you know, follow it in various ways. And of course, you know, organized religion, institutionalized religion, many critiques to be had about that. But what do we make about the emergence of another thing that has as its, you know, fundamental basis these same principles of truth and freedom and, you know, equality and connectedness and fairness, etc., manifest in such a thing and accruing value so rapidly by virtue of everybody wanting to have a part of it, be a part of it, and that it's upgrading our own, it's helping us develop a perspective around that eternal question of how should I orient my perspective in the world such that it leads to the best outcome for myself and the people that I share an environment, a culture, a country, a market with. Like, you know, that's what it's doing. And I think that's why we're so compelled to have these conversations and to pursue these lines of thinking, because again, what's more important? So when we ask the question, or to answer your question, Hodl, like, how do you give yourself permission? For me, I mean, I think step one is letting go of any kind of rigid conception of who you are or what your perspective is. Because if you do that, you're going to contain yourself. You know, you can make a prison of your own making, and you're not going to get very far. And you know, so but then if you don't have those parameters of your own self-conception, it's like you're just a blob, right? So you need some parameters. You need something to orient that perspective. You need something to determine how you should act and move through the world. And I think we allow ourselves the opportunity to receive the grace of these higher values and principles by aligning or subordinating ourselves to them to the extent that we understand how to do that. And so if you do that, if you say, I'm going to subordinate myself to truth, or I'm going to subordinate myself to peace or something like that, i.e. I'm going to sacrifice my own time, energy, and opportunities to pursue even those ends, even occasionally at the expense of what I think are best for my own ends to accrue to my version of myself. And I understand that's by no means a simple task, and we can even discuss if it's a rational task to do. But if we do that, I think when you encounter things of such great value, be it love, friendship, beauty, the principles represented in Bitcoin, you're almost automatically drawn to integrate them and pursue them to the extent that you're capable of. And so by virtue of that, you don't have to grant yourself permission because you've opened up the gates already to pursue what it represents, or something like that.
Totally. I for me,
I think
like,
it's worth. Go ahead, Hodl.
No, I was just gonna say on the point about, like, you know, anchoring yourself to an ideal, like, I anchored myself to truth. That's my life. I've been anchored to it forever, as long as I can remember. Every time I lied, you know, and I did a lot, as everybody does. Like, it was destructive to me internally and would set me off on the wrong course. And so what I found in anchoring myself to truth is that the world fucking hates the truth, and it hates people that tell the truth. And it's like, it's been quite a lonely path. So that's why I feel, you know, such brotherhood with other Bitcoiners like you guys who, you know, seek truth as a virtue and seek to tell the truth, because it's only in understanding what's actually happening that we can even begin to have some sort of a modicum of course correction and get on the right path, you know?
Well, this like this night of the dark soul, if you will, of like needing to pursue truth and like have it be all kind of fucked up and have people hate you. Like this was all like a really important pursuit and path to like realize it actually was a meaningful thing. And I mean, for me particularly, like going through all of this and then finally like meeting other people who were like, yay, like Bitcoin, we love, you know, like it made it all the more meaningful to be like, oh, like, you know, pursuing this has been a meaningful pursuit for me, and that there is something good here and other people do see this. And I think it's of particular importance in our day and age, because like I don't think it can be understated like just how absolutely fucked up and full of lies and deceit and deception this world is. Like if you take the normie perspective, like I thought it, I'm trying to remember who was fighting with people online recently about the idea of that like taxation is just straight theft and extortion, and to like see the amount of fucking mental gymnastics going on with people about like, no, it's like a great thing. Like this is a fucked up, distorted world that we live in, where people are like, yeah, like paying taxes and inflation's like a great thing because you get roads, and that like they're literally that retarded that they can't like connect the dots to be like, maybe roads don't cost trillions of dollars, and like maybe these warplanes and shit are like kind of expensive. Like most people can't do that. And so like that's all the more meaningful to actually sit down and insist like, no, this is like fucked up and wrong. You're like stealing my money and then blowing up brown people with it because you don't like what they stand for in the world. So get fucked. I don't want to participate anymore. And it's great to like see other people be like, yeah, right on, as opposed to like me out in normie world. I have people like, no, we have to be gentle, and the only way that we can stop the state is if we hold their hand and say, pretty please, can you stop killing the brown people because they're not as bad as you think. You know, like that's how most people think the world changes, is that like you fucking whine and you keep whining, and then you whine some more, and then you like win. I don't know how they got to that conclusion, but they seem to think that that's how it works. I don't know, maybe it's woke culture that's like affected everything, because that does seem to actually kind of work.
Rob,
I
you're
just keep hearing I don't know if it was H.G. Wells or someone else, the more a society drifts from the truth, the more it hates those who speak it. And at this point in my Bitcoin journey, it's so painfully obvious that fiat deviates us from truth. It's hard. I just bang my head against the wall when I see things now occurring, and I mean that very practically, right? Like the American pragmatist, truth is the end of inquiry. Another way to say that is like whatever works. So you need to keep asking questions and trying new things, and whatever works is at least the pragmatic truth. Doesn't have to be the capital T transcendental truth, but it's a pragmatic truth in the sense that that's what works. But when you stop asking questions because someone said, fuck you, here's the answer, this is the law, do it because I said so, you're literally creating a schism between our ability to discover truth and our action in the world. And that just, I mean, it rips us apart, rips us apart internally, externally, etc. And on the topic of insanity, I think this is very important, that we often think there's like sane, insane, some objective term, but also not, right? Like there's things that cultures do today that we would all sit here in the West and say it's fucking insane. Like they eat dogs, they're fucking insane. Why would you do that? But to them, they've been doing it for thousands of years. It's no big deal. There's a great little vignette in the book Leela, the story of the Brujo, B-R-U-J-O. And he was basically this Native American guy that grew up in kind of a Western upbringing. So then when he came back to the Native American tribe, he had all these cultural ways about him that were very foreign to his tribe. And so at first they hated him, right? They like strung him up by his thumbs to the point where he was partly crippled, and they, despised the way he was in a lot of ways. But over time, this is in the New World, so the white people were steadily taking over more and more of the land, and eventually he became this indispensable liaison between a new culture and the old culture. So he became like the mayor of the town. So there's this, I'm not doing it perfect justice here. It's a great story. I encourage you to go read it. But the moral is this guy that was designated, diagnosably insane due to his cultural norms at one point in history, a few decades later was the mayor of the town. Like you needed that guy more than anyone because of the circumstances the culture faced. Two value systems or two cultures colliding calls forth different competencies, right, to deal with a changing environment. So are Bitcoiners insane relative to fiat world? Of course we are, right? We're saying in fiat world, government resolution, law, coercion, like that's the solution to everything, right? What's the solution to climate change? Carbon tax credits, right? What's the solution to the COVID pandemic? Print more money. So are we insane relative to that? Well, fuck yeah, we're insane relative to that because we don't believe in any of that nonsense. But it's, I don't know, I guess the thing about Bitcoin, again, if we think that the pragmatic truth is just whatever works, ultimately Bitcoin is making it such that violence works less effectively as a wealth acquisition strategy. So violence has just worked to acquire wealth for most of history, but now, thanks to Bitcoin, in theory, it would make it work less. And I guess to try and tie this to Hodl's question, I don't know. Like, is it giving yourself permission when you just speak freely? I feel like it's almost like dispensing with the notion of permission in a way. You're like, I used to kind of measure my words and measure my audience, try to curate my message for this situation or that situation, and try to instrumentalize it in a way that creates an outcome that I desire. And now it's like, I just take all that complex of shit and fucking throw it in the heap. And like, I'm just going to say it.
Well, that's
fucking say
subordinating
it. Like, whatever it is,
yourself to truth,
and let the chips fall where they may. Yeah, so long as I'm aligned, right? Like it feels good in the gut and the heart and the mind, and it could just, of course, you're going to misstep. You'll have to retract things as we all do, but just it dispenses with all of that cognitive or even spiritual dissonance we suffer trying to navigate fiat world, where you're like, oh, this guy's really important, I need to talk this way, and then, oh, this girl knows so and so, and I'm trying to get in on this deal. It's like, fuck all
It's so
that. Like, it's just
it's
noise.
so nice to be
you
free
can
from
cleanse
that.
yourself of all this noise.
Yeah, man.
True.
It's,
Yeah.
it's,
I mean,
so,
that's
it's so
a-
great to not be involved in any of that shit. Like when you meet someone who's super wealthy, super powerful, whatever, like you don't have to be thinking like all these different things. Like how can I gain from this and that? You're like, no, let's just, I want to connect on the basis, like the most truthful basis we can, where our interests align, and further our understanding in whatever domain, absent any of those considerations. And it's awesome because you end up building way better relationships with people, unsurprisingly.
Totally.
I mean, this is the ancient Greek concept called parousia, which is the idea of to speak truth courageously, or to like speak truth in the face of danger. And I think like particularly in fiat world, with what Rob was saying about, you know, like the further society drifts from the truth, the more dangerous and heresy, you know, becomes speaking the truth. And like that's literally what's going on a giant shilling point, is essentially we're collectively awakening and being like, hey, this fiat thing's like utter fucking bullshit. And like, you know, the people in the fiat game are like, no, like this is the only way it can be done. And it's interesting because like the more we say it, the more that like there's this drifting that's like I find really fascinating. Like and it's lining up in places that I didn't expect. Like the idea now of veganism to me is like such bunk bullshit. And it's not because like we shouldn't eat animals. It's like your solution is literally to like get gigantic conglomerates to like make some fucking freak thing of nature out of a lab to like feed people. And like you want to like be mining all of this fertilizer out of rock that took like millions of years to accumulate, and you want to like spread it all over the topsoil and then like drill it in. And like you want to talk to me about compassion towards animals when like you don't know the first fucking thing about animal husbandry. And I thought it was really interesting that the guy has a hunting show. His name Steve Rennell. Like I was watching a movie with him, and it was really great that there was some guy who was like, "You hunt deer, and like you're an evil bad person because you killed the deer." And he was like, "Look, dude," he was like, "I can tell you right now that like even if you started trying to learn about deer today, that like I know magnitudes more about deer and their habits and how they survive than you will ever know." And he was like, and I also have a deeper compassion for them because like when I kill them, I understand that they are sacrificing their life for me to get to survive. And that gives me a deeper and more meaningful relationship to them. And I just think it's so interesting that like the alienation from things becomes like the justification for like why they're bad or different. And like this is part of like lobotomized fiat world, is because it's not just there, but like, you know, medical science, like trust the science. You're not trusting science at all. You're taking an authoritarian decree from someone who says they're a scientist as the science. And I don't know, like it's just becoming funnier and funnier to me that like I feel like I'm the jester at like the end of society, where like I'm the last person that gets to tell the truth. And so like telling the truth is fucking hilarious, that like magic internet money is going to save us from like these clowns who literally believe that like, you know, we're the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and we love you, and we're going to save you by putting you in massive fucking debt and destroying your society and making you part of our imperialist structure. Right? That's good.
I
And the
said,
best is that these guys believe it too.
dude, I told somebody, I said, if I ever write a memoir, it's just going to be called I Don't Agree. That's my whole life, is just people going around telling me stuff and maybe just be like, no, I don't agree. Like I remember one time I was at a party, fancy party in Boston. There were all these fancy Boston people, and this woman from MIT was telling me that she had a startup, and they were going to put spider silk in the atmosphere, and that was going to prevent global warming. And I looked at her, I was a couple drinks in, I was like, that idea is fucking retarded. And she was like, what? And I was like, how are you gonna do that? She was like, we're gonna have like a blimp. I was like, that's stupid. How does it stay in the atmosphere? It never is gonna work. You know, and like she had just been living in this bubble where everybody was just like, oh, wonderful. You're really doing something. Wow, good for you, right? And like she meets somebody like me who's just like, I don't agree. I do not agree. That's stupid. And like nowadays, we're being asked to agree with all sorts of things that are just absolutely insane. It's like I said this on stage in Miami, but it's like a reporter is standing in front of a burning building pretending it's not on fire. and you're supposed to also pretend it's not on fire. It's fucking on fire, man. I can see it. It's right there. What? I'm not going to agree to that. And then they're like, if you don't agree to that, you're a racist. And you're like, what? I don't agree to that either. And they're like, if you don't agree to that, we have to put you in a prison. You're like, then do it. Just fucking do it at this point. Like, who gives a shit? I don't agree. I'm never going to say that building's not on fire. It's clearly on fire. Fuck you. You know, like.
Well, this goes to show like the very real politicization of speaking truth in a world where the liars have control of everything. And what I think is more interesting is like, it's accelerating to a very extreme place where, you know, John, in your homeland, a bunch of people were like, hey, this vaccine thing's bullshit and we're going to go protest it. And people were like, cut off their bank account. Like people lost their fucking mind over it. And like I just find it fascinating at how like everything's kind of twisting on itself. Like literally Obama, who's arguably the most powerful person in the United States, like just gave a speech about like how we need to be censoring people in the name of freedom of speech. And like it's
one of the things that I find most like we can, the whole like the house is on fire and you're telling us to say it's not on fire, but it's clearly on fire. Like that's maddening and incredibly disruptive to society. But you know, to Rob's point, I think the even more egregious offense is like, as he said about the pragmatists, like it doesn't have to be a capital T truth. It's like, it's true if it works as best as we can kind of make it work. But I think the purpose of that is when you combine someone who's established truth within themselves with the physical or phenomenal world. I think if we're here for any reason, I feel like part of it is to combine those truths such that together we can collectively discern more and more and more and more truth. You know, and this is at least my interpretation of like the kingdom of God idea, right? If you and actually, Rob, what you were saying earlier about the difference between the ascetic and the billionaire, maybe it's something like the ascetic perceives a scarcity of God within themselves. And they try to alleviate that scarcity, you know, toward liberation. And maybe the billionaire is kind of pursuing, trying to alleviate the scarcity of God in the world by accumulating more of the world, or by discovering more of the world, or by conjuring up more within the world. And so I think, you know, maybe to answer my own question 20 minutes ago is like, I think they're both two ends of a necessary spectrum, which is supposed to be, we align ourselves to truth as much as we can as individuals, and then we collectively come together to engage with the phenomenal world to find truth within it based on being those sorts of individuals ourselves. And so when the mechanism for doing that with one another is so perverted, we're going to create, like, instead of the kingdom of God on earth, basically hell on earth. Right. But if we can rectify that, and I think that's why we're all here with Bitcoin, like what might we discover in terms of both, like, because all those pragmatic truths are either pushing toward or being pulled by something. Right. And so I think the more we can establish and maintain those pragmatic truths, I think they're bringing us toward a greater truth ultimately, or a greater clarity around truth ultimately. And that's what excites me, is like, what might we discover and become, both as individuals and as a cooperating collective, when our relationships with one another and the ways in which we both express and discover value are so pristinely constituted, you know, and then we get a world that,
and we've seen this already, right? There's this, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to reinforce your point. Actually, it's like we've already seen this dynamic play out, where like the phrase that came to mind, which is probably from Peterson, but I'm not sure, all true maps must align, right? So even these pragmatic truths or useful truths, they share something. There's some reason they all point the same direction in a way, right? They're pointed towards capital T truth, perhaps. But again, this is why I'm so hung up lately philosophically on fiat itself, because fiat is putting opinion over truth, right? Instead of asking questions and digging into something and figuring out a better way, putting your skin in the game and experimenting with what works and what doesn't work, dispensing what doesn't work, keeping what does work, and iterating. We're saying, no, fuck that. This is the law. This is how we're going to do it. We're done asking questions. Like, you either do it this way or you're at the point of a gun, effectively. And that's why the liars have control. We want to know why the liars have control in the world, because they fucking stopped the process of truth discovery and substituted it with just fiat, the imposition of opinion. So it's like, of course we're fucking deviating from the truth. Like, we've got a bunch of idiots telling us what is versus letting us figure it out for ourselves. And all of that, and again, goes back to property for me. It's, if property can be violated, then the liars can gain control, right? That's what they're doing. They're just saying, again, print more money. Like, it sounds so good. It's almost like a euphemism, because everyone wants more money. We don't have enough money. It's always scarce, right? Demand always outstrips supply. But when you print it, you're not solving that problem at all. You're not solving any problem at all, other than for those that could print it ostensibly in the short term, but you're creating more problems for everyone in the long term. And I mean, it's as nonsensical as trust the science, which someone said earlier. What the fuck does that mean? It's like, science is whatever has not been disproven through inquiry. It's like, we have a bunch of hypotheses. You start chopping them down, right? Like, oh, well, this experiment disproved that, disproved this, disproved that. Whatever hypothesis is left just becomes, it ossifies itself as scientific knowledge over time. So when you say trust the science, it's like a fiat term. They're like, oh, don't ask any more questions, just trust the science. Like, motherfucker, science is questions. What are you talking about? Like, you're just spewing these blatant oxymorons, and they're creating this false religion behind it. And it gets so infectious that we have World Economic Forum now, Schwab recently tweeting out, no more private property and no more meat eating. Okay, World Economic Forum. He's in charge of the World Economic Forum. There's no such thing as an economy without private property. Like, it doesn't work. It becomes a diseconomy, essentially. Like literally, the Soviet Union, $100 billion of inputs, $30 billion of outputs. Like, less comes out than goes in, because it's a diseconomy, effectively. And I just,
the Soviet Union, with they pretend, this idea, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work.
Yes, exactly. So this whole human predisposition to self-deception, and like, I can just say what is versus actually having to deal with what is. And we've actually deceived and deluded ourselves into thinking that works, like that's sustainable. We're just going through the latest iteration of that, but this time, unfortunately, it's coordinated and scaled globally. So I think the consequences are going to be that much worse.
As long as we're just allowed to say stupid things that we want to happen, I just want to go with free blowjobs on Tuesdays and free steaks.
I'm down for the steaks, but if you're giving out the blowjobs, I'm gonna pass. Well, I mean, like, on your point that like this is a globally coordinated thing at this point in time. For me, this is what's been helpful with Heidegger and other philosophy, is that like, understanding the severity of the consequences at this point in time. Like, I sincerely believe that this is all eschatological at this point in time, like dealing with the actual end of times itself, because like what's going on a human scale. I mean, first of all, the fact that like we're all thousands of miles apart from each other, like having this casual conversation with each other is not only fucking awesome and like talks to how great technology is, but like the fact that this thing in front of us is so fucking powerful, and that, you know, then there's thousands of people watching as well, strewn all across the globe, goes to show that like technology and the internet is really, 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 really fucking powerful. And because we've all been lobotomized morons that have been part of fiat world, we're now allowing for this apparatus to capture us in a very, very powerful way that like if we don't thoughtfully reorganize around, like we're all going to be trapped inside of a digital cage forever. You know, like our great grandchildren are going to be captured in this fucked up maniacal mess where Klaus Schwab gets to own everything. We all have digital properties, and you know, we're going to be living in the metaverse, which is going to be an absolute hell. And so I think understanding that the internet's pretty young, Bitcoin's even younger than that. We need to utilize this to essentially extricate the internet and save ourselves to be able to have this globally free society is really, really important. And it also goes to show why everything is so fucked up and why when people simply speak truth in the world now, they get quote unquote canceled. Which, you know, let's give it the gravity it deserves. It's not canceling. Like, they're literally trying to destroy people's business, careers, and lives, all the way to the extent of utilizing saying that, you know, this cancel culture is, you know, it ends with imprisonment or gulags. And so, not to get super fucking scary with people, but what's going on is really, really important, because as cool as, you know, getting wealthy and making money is, it's really important that we free society and we create a free global monetary standard. Because if we don't, like, these insane assholes all want to put us into a digital panopticon where, like, they get to monitor us all the fucking time. And, like, if you eat that extra piece of meat, like, the police are going to show up and, like, fucking bash your head in. And it's really scary. But again, in the face of this absolutely terrifying monolithic thing, I sincerely think, like, we have this sort of destiny that we get to be like, yo, fuck off. And, like, when you come for me, I want you to know that, like, my people have created rituals and ways to pass on my wealth to my children or my children's children or whoever else, so that, like, not only do you never get to touch it, but, like, my people are actively going to seek revenge against you and what you people represent. And that's exciting, you know, like, that's really awesome that, like, we get to participate in this global collective that's going to redeem and save humanity. And I really believe that. And it's going to be, like, fun and kind of slapstick. And, you know, as we already know from Miami, like, Miami was, you know, like, that experience was so nourishing and rejuvenating and soulful that, you know, just getting to bask in that and share with that, while it's scary to be here and I really have these moments where, like, the existential fear seizes me, it's also really exciting because, like, and one thing I want to touch on too is that, like, we're not Bitcoin maximalists, we're truth maximalists. And, like, we only arove at Bitcoin because of the truth that it entails. And, like, while it may be possible that some other thing can overtake it, what I'm realizing more and more is what makes Bitcoin so special is how Satoshi produced it and pushed it out into the world. There, like, no other coin has any founder, any story, any destiny similar to that. And that's super, super, super important. And, you know, like, I won't get behind Ethereum, not because of all of its fucking problems and stuff, but, like, the fiat that's inherent with how its, you know, pre-mine was created, like, that's a crime. That's a fundamental crime that these people get to be like, global monetary standard, but these assholes who showed up first that get to participate in the pre-sale, they all win the most. You know, like, it's just more of the same fiat lie. Whereas Bitcoin has that proof of work at its base that's so important.
You know, just reflecting on the atmosphere and how it felt to be in Miami. Yeah, as you guys know, I brought my dad, and, like, I think it was after the night of the beefsteak. So that was, like, the second night we were there, I think. And we were just sitting around the next day, and he was like, man, I can't believe how, like, enthusiastic, intelligent, polite, humble, like, welcoming, generous everyone is. And I was like, yeah. So now you see what I'm so excited about, right? You see how awesome this is. And I think, you know, so, like, those are the people that have unplugged themselves, right, from that former system. And now they're operating in this system. And to your point, Eric and Rob, what you were saying about how things become so perverted, like, I think broadly speaking, and I know we all get in trouble when we generalize in this space, but being oriented most by truth and perhaps freedom as well. I mean, those are two values or principles that are extremely important in how I orient or try to orient myself. It's a humbling thing, right? You humble your own notions. I mean, that's what fiat is, right? Saying, no, not the truth, not what is real, what I think is true or what I want. And people are, you know, if they're not at the helm of that system, which most people aren't, they've certainly been deriving their signals and their conditioning from that system. And so there's been this, like, surreptitious, you know, virus of some kind in their mind where they believe they live in this relativistic world where there's no truth sufficiently grand to be humbled by. I think part of the reason why everyone in Bitcoin is so humble among other great qualities, is because they've recognized the truth of this thing, and they agree to be bound by it in a certain sense. And that is basically the antithesis of fiat, and why there's so much friction between this emerging culture system market and the fiat culture system market, because this one, I mean, it's like a perfect analogy is kind of like ego death in psychedelics, right? You're humbled by the power of that experience temporarily, so a lot of people experience a loss of their perception of their independent self, right? They connect with everything, connect with God, whatever. And then you come down and you come back to your ego self-identifying person, but with a little sparkle in your eye or a little space between the awareness and, the awareness behind who you think you are. There's a space there now. And that I think is helpful and healthy. And I think Bitcoin fosters a similar thing. People come in and it's challenging and it's, painful at times, just like a psychedelic experience can be. But by virtue of once you recognize or understand that you're in the presence of or contemplating or attempting to understand a profound truth, you end up, rightfully in my mind, subordinating yourself to that for the good that can come from doing so, both for you and others. And as a result, you maintain that humility. And I think, a hallmark of why we all like, it's a big love fest when we get together. I sometimes define love as a recognition of the lack of separation between all people and potentially all things. And what ego death is, what fosters that. You could explain that by saying, well, I've eliminated the barriers between myself and others. But I think, that's kind of why the love fest is as it is amongst Bitcoiners, because at least to a certain degree, I mean, obviously we're not perfect and we're not all the Godhead all the time. We're our own selves, but we have that appreciation for, or we've all mutually agreed to be bound by, or at least humbled to some degree by a higher truth. And we're all basking in that and contributing to it and trying to understand it better. And that makes for a very different circumstance or environment than what is happening in fiat land, where everything is relative and there basically is no truth that is humbling people, and people are acting really fucked up as a result.
I had all these like same as you, John, like so many fucking great interactions in Miami. Like if you meet a douchebag amongst the Bitcoiners, that person is the exception to the rule that all Bitcoiners are cool, awesome human beings or whatever. And like, usually people just want to come up and tell me their story. There's like a million awesome stories and like everybody's cool as fuck. And I always like give them as much time as I can and listen to everything and yada, 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 whatever. And like one guy who I talk to occasionally, who's I think one of Rob's co-authors on Thank God for Bitcoin, is J.M. Bush. And he came up to me and he was like, yeah, we were talking. He was like, oh, the family's moving back from Uruguay and everything. And all I did was I was just like, oh, that's cool, man. Like, how are your kids handling the move or whatever? And he was like, dude, it's like so cool that you would like ask about my kids. It's like, of course I care about your kids, man. These are like little future hodlers. Like, why would I not care about them? They're an awesome part of this story too, And it's just like a million interactions like that like, I don't know, Bitcoiners are the fucking shit. Like, what do they do at the Ethereum conference? Like fucking snort Skittles and jerk off to pictures of cats? I don't know and I don't want to know, like leave me out of it.
I kind of want us to go incognito to like some of these shitcoin conferences just to like see what the conversations are like.
It'd be amazing.
I just think it would be really wild because like I don't know, like the same thing with me, like the nourishment that I get from these interactions with people, and we had the same thing last year, John, but just a lot of people come and be like, hey, thanks for your work, I really appreciate it, it helps me think deeper and go deeper on the stuff, and just really great interactions. And I don't think I heard a goddamn peep about the price the entire time that I was at the conference, and I find it so fascinating. And like, again, this is just part of what fucked up clown world is about, is that like we're all here talking about like our shilling point is money, and this is all about money, but it has nothing to do with money. We don't talk about money at all, and it's just, I don't know, it's so much fun. And it reminds me of like in the Divine Comedy, when Virgil and Dante like get to the final level of hell, and Dante's like, we've been like going for a fucking while, bro. Like, how do we get out of here? He's like, oh, check it out. There's like a trap door at the very bottom. You just whoop, go right back up to the top. You know, and I feel like that's what's going on with all this crazy shit that's going on in the world, is that, like, you know, if we didn't have Bitcoin, we'd be in the final layer of hell, like waiting for the fucking panopticon to come down and, you know, eating our last steak that we'll ever be able to have. But instead, Satoshi was like, hey, there's this door right here, so you guys can just like go right back up to the top. And it's like, oh, all right, fantastic, thank you. With that being said, you know what's really interesting is
so
the final level of hell was reserved explicitly for the counterfeiters. Isn't that interesting?
as it should be, because that's exactly what we were describing earlier, that you start to create a representation that's meant to navigate you in reality, but it deviates from reality. So it's you're deceiving yourself, right, by embracing a counterfeit, whatever it is.
What if somebody made a map?
As Casey said, that nobody
drive off a cliff? We would obviously be very mad at that person, you know, and for good reason.
Yes.
Fiat's the same thing. Yeah,
What's happening civilizationally?
And that's exactly what Fiat is. Exactly. Brilliant fucking analogy for it. When Casey, you said that nobody mentioned the Bitcoin price at the whole conference, like it hit me kind of like a thunderbolt. I was like, oh, fuck, nobody mentioned the price to me once at the whole conference. Not once. I didn't hear one peep about it, not one question. But as soon as you go into anywhere in the fiat world and people see my tattoo or hear whatever Bitcoin comes up, that's the first question. So is it, and what, you know, again, you're locked in relativity. You're locked into this world of relativity. Like, what is this compared to that? This compared to this compared to that. But in Bitcoin, I don't know, we're like embracing something that's absolute, and then it's changing us, right? Like it's like that embrace, hugging intellectually or whatever you're doing to Bitcoin is actually transforming you from the inside out. And I'm like, okay, so humility in the face of the absolute, which is the only proper response. Because if you're having anything other than humility in face of the absolute, you're in for a fucking hard reality check. Now I'm trying to think, like, who else is like this. When I was in Kauai for 14 months, I got a little bit of exposure to the surfing community. And I mean, those motherfuckers are humble too. They're very laid back and chill. A lot of them are Bitcoiners. And it's because they're out there like facing reality. You know, you go out on the ocean and the waves are 12 feet fucking high. You're not cocky and hot to trot. You're humble and you're picking your spots, and you're just a whole different person, I guess. And it seems to me like, I don't know, there's some deep relationship between freedom and, let's say, at least pragmatic truth. Like, you can't get to pragmatic truth if you don't have freedom. If there's something stopping freedom in any way, then you're just not going to get to the bottom of whatever you're trying to inquire about. And I love that you said truth maximalism, because it's interesting. It's like, yeah, okay, we are truth maximalists, but it's not like I was a truth maximalist and then I came into Bitcoin. I got into Bitcoin for reasons of whatever fiat pursuit, you know, oh, I can get rich, or this is interesting, or I do a thing. But again, by embracing the concept of Bitcoin, it imbued me with truth maximalism, which I would also add, you know, again, truth and freedom. I have a hard time. I don't think you can have one without the other, frankly. You definitely can't discover truth without freedom. And I guess if you had truth, would you need freedom? I mean, isn't truth, the truth of being human ultimately is that we're free. That's what love and reason and all these things are. It's like, it needs to be mutual, it needs to be consensual. Otherwise, it's fucking not.
Precisely.
It's fake.
Well, and like what you were saying about surfers, like the same thing is that I had a great conversation with Pablo about this. It's that you now are having an experience where you're encountering death, and you have to be realistic about, I am going to die at some point, whether it's now or later. Yeah. And being in face of that absolute, you have to think about, okay, what's the truth here? I can fucking lie to myself and say I'm big hot shit and I can ride this 30-foot wave. And guess what? Now you're fucking dead. There's a great documentary on Netflix about the 100-foot wave, where a guy talks about he was going to drop in on, like, you know, an 80-foot wave, and he doesn't. gets absolutely crushed by the wave behind him. And he's like, I know if I dropped into that wave, I would have died. And I got real close to death anyways, but I would have died had I dropped into that. And I think that, again, something different from the Ethereum community is they're out here fucking masturbating each other, being like, we're going to live forever because we science, you know, instead of just being like, actually, why don't you just come to the fact that you're going to fucking die? And furthermore, like, I just want to point out, like, what a fucked up idea that you think that, like, how disrespectful to all of your ancestors who had to die and struggle through life, and how disrespectful to all of posterity to say, well, this all belongs to me now because I can live forever. Like, get fucked, man. Like, that is such a fucked up, thoughtless, and hurtful thing. And not to mention that, like, I don't know, like, it is so lobotomized and disconnected from anything relational to being human that I think, like, these are a lot of the very deep struggles that I think are really important, that by virtue of Bitcoin, and like you were saying, Rob, like we you know, come for the profit, stay for the prophecy. I think that this is the stuff that iteratively reflects and inflects back on us. And this is what I'm so excited about reading Heidegger now and understanding his fucking mumbo jumbo that he's talking about, because he's talking about this event in human history that comes after nihilism, where we start to return to truth. And as we return to truth, that reflects on our being and the beings of others. And that, like, now we start relating to being in this really powerful way. But it's all done through this process of self-concealment and restraint that helps build up and resonate being much deeper and more reverberating in each of us, which we all seem to totally be experiencing. And yeah, I just want to give credence to how powerful and important it is, and that like we're all participating in this wacky slapstick thing in our own important and unique ways, and we're all appreciated for that as well. And how great! There's like, anywhere else, you're just another cog in the machine, whereas here, like, you're actually like a unique and beautiful person who's valued for your aesthetic contributions to the whole space.
You know what's interesting about like the insight that people don't speak about the price at Bitcoin events, but when you're in the outside world, that's all people speak about. It's basically like, inside the Bitcoin event, we know that things are real. We know that this is a real thing that's happening. And in the outside world, people are like, is that real? Is that happening? How big is your God? Is your God worth $42,000? We're like, oh yeah, it is, baby. Like, didn't it used to be worth 69? We're like, don't worry about it. Our God grows 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it keeps getting bigger. You know, and they're like, what? And you're like, yeah, don't worry, I gotta go. Fuck you, I'm out.
You know, I love this idea of death being the only other absolute that we've really had to contend with as humans, because, you know, obviously death, like, it is the instantaneous and total end of, or cessation of all experience, right? There's a very absolute, irreversible aspect to it. But when we introduce fiat into the socioeconomic fabric, what do we get? We get fucking zombie companies. They can't die, right? And this is the problem. The problem is that they cannot die. If they can't die, then we can't learn from our own mistakes. We just keep feeding our own mistakes. Like, it's a loss-producing enterprise, but we'll subsidize it with stolen taxpayer money and just keep it going and deviate ourselves even further from the truth. And this, it's like, I keep going back to the God. We talked about this on the Mike Hill series a little bit, but the etymology of the word God grounds out in the Proto-Indo-European root word gut, G-H-U-T. It has 4 meanings, 2 of which are to return or to barter and exchange. And I always think about the Bible, like the core message being to glorify God. And if we think that to glorify means something like to magnify with attention, then maybe at least one aspect of God that we can deal with is just to magnify exchange itself with attention, to increase the intensity of exchange, which again is to say, remove all fiat. Just let people interact freely, as much freedom as possible, as much exchange as possible. as roundabout of production processes as possible. Like the longer we make that production chain, this is many hands make light work, the more rich we become. And so the idea of like truth being related to exchange or free exchange, again, we're back to freedom and truth. And that isn't that the truth though? Like the truth is we have reason, we understand that. We have a limited conscious bandwidth, we understand that. We only have so much attention to give to any project. We're basically single focused, right? Wherever you look, you see that, you don't see this or that. And then the other truth is by working together, we produce a lot more and solve a lot more problems than we do working in isolation. So the idea of just leaving that self-organizing natural process free without trying to attack it with fiat or control it or organize it from on high, that's the key. It's so simple, but we've never been able to create a situation where the temptation could not successfully exploit the process, the market process, let's say. But now Bitcoin is like what is it? An immune response of the market, perhaps? Like the market keeps getting, violated by statism. So finally it just sort of bucks off statism by making these economic flows, I guess less disruptible or distortable, something like that. And then if God is exchange in that etymological sense, and maybe it brings us closer to God by increasing the intensity of exchange.
Well, I mean, I think if you maybe admit that there's some rhyme or reason or order to life in the universe that we're not fully aware of, and I think you probably have to admit that, talking about the map and the territory as we were earlier, like when we go off course, and again, this is represented in all sorts of religious stories and stuff, but when we go off course so much, when our essence of what we are and our perception and engagement with reality goes off course, it seems like, the territory instills in us that upgraded idea that we need to course correct. We would just call it our ingenuity. But of course, as Rob was just saying, I mean, everything is in relationship. We're in relationship with one another. We're in relationship with the world. And so how can, we can explain it away just by saying, yeah, we innovate when there's problems. But the bigger question is like, well, what's happening there when we do that? Why is that even a thing that we do? Why is that natural? Why do we always kind of come back to trying to find the proper level, to having the map the territory? And I think it's really interesting, the etymology of that word that Rob was just brought up, because I think we have two relationships of exchange. One is ourselves with a higher power. And the reason why that's an exchange is because we have to, as Rob was saying, we have limited energy, time, and attention resources. And so how we decide to constitute a relationship of those things with something grander than us, perhaps more absolute than us, whether it be death, whether it be truth, whether it be God, whether it be love, whatever we want to put up there, maybe all of those things. And then we have a relationship of exchange with quote unquote society, the interpersonal relationships that we constitute, and how are those relationships mediated via how we exchange what's limited within us and what's limited within other people. And again, if you go back to these religious stories, I mean, what are they? It's how do you constitute the best relationship with the quote unquote absolute, the most fundamentally ordering forces? And then how do you engage with others on a basis by which you've done that? And so, there's so much, I think this is why we're so interested, again, because there's so much wisdom in a lot of these former thinkers and a lot of these former stories and phenomena that have a lot of application in what's going on today, particularly around Bitcoin. And to the point about death and the absolute, I mean, I think that's another example of death is a truth, inarguable. And as a result, you benefit from humbling yourself to that truth. You can try to ignore it, but you'll probably have a worse experience of life and the process of dying. But if you accept your death, and again, represented in philosophy, theology, shamanism, religious practices, if you develop a better relationship with your mortality, you're more likely to foster a greater experience of life while living. And, you know, of course, ease the transition to whatever comes afterwards, or even if it's just the process of dying. And I think something is similar true to the notion of an absolute truth. And I, you know, to the question of like truth and freedom, I feel like if you try to develop a perspective or an awareness or consciousness that is maximally receptive to truth, I think the way you foster that, or I think that objective leads to ultimately a type of freedom or a type of liberation. And I think it also necessarily leads to finding that which is absolute. And again, I keep using the word humbling or subordinating yourself to it. Perhaps there's a better word, but establishing the optimal relationship between that which is absolute and that which is limited in you. And that seems to be what fosters the best outcomes for individual and collective.
Man, it's so funny because, you know, I was thinking about, you know, how the market maybe has like thrown this error as per se that became Bitcoin as like an immunological response to, you know, the failures of the market. Like I was thinking about how, you know, DMT is the combination of a vine and a MAOI inhibitor. And if you ask the ayahuasqueros, they basically tell you like, how did, you know, there's like so many species of plants in the Amazon. It's like, how did you find these two and combine them? And they're just like, the plants told us, dummy. Like we just listen to the plants, and like it doesn't factor in our Western worldview, right? Like at all. And it just reminds me like this concept between like the absolute, you know, there's this idea that like we as human beings, we don't see reality. We just see a version of reality that's tuned for human evolutionary fitness. So, you know, survive and fuck and thrive. Like that's it. That's what we're tuned for. And like the version of reality I see, it's just that. It's just human evolutionary fitness. And there is like this wellspring of like absolute truth, absolute reality that you can get in touch with by using like entheogens or whatever, like plant chemicals, or maybe you get access to it when you die or near-death experience. I don't know, like meditation, maybe you can get there. But there's a more true, more real version of reality that's like this constant like wellspring for humanity that we can always go back to. And that's where we take fire from. Like that is the realm we take fire from. And, you know, like that like dance between like, when is it time to be part of the all? And when is it time to be like in your human evolutionary fitness and like in the realm of potentiality, like creating things here on earth so that they benefit human existence and, you know, make everything better for the people that come after you. Like, and when is your time over? When is you like, you know, to transcend back into the all or like the divine or whatever you want to call it. Like,
that's a hero myth.
Like,
how do you act like a god and an animal at the same time, and how to employ or deploy which, when, and in what way,
yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And like, how to humble yourself in the presence of something so above you, you know, and how do you act? How do you give it the proper respect and reverence while also like utilizing the tools that you were given in order to make, you know, life here better? It's tricky.
Exactly.
I mean,
and you know, let's be like fair in saying that, because we're talking about Bitcoin having characteristics of something that which is absolute, and as a result, it's having that we are forced to conform to it, and we're being imbued with perhaps its principles, and perhaps it's drawing out the principles that constitute it from us and causing us to amplify them, and that's all awesome. But Bitcoin's not as absolute as death, right? Like if Jupiter ran into the Earth right now and hit out all the satellites and everything, like Bitcoin's gone. But well, actually, you know, human death, the concept of human death would be gone along with that. So maybe that was that's a tricky example, but you know what I'm saying? Like maybe it's not as absolute as the notion of absolute that we've previously contended with, but it's so much closer to it, or so close to it than anything we've ever encountered or developed ourselves, that it seems to be having a similar effect of compelling transformation.
And even more radical, it exists in the digital realm where there is nothing absolute. So not only is it more absolute than many things in reality, it is also more absolute than everything in the digital realm by a lot.
Well, and it's combining all these fucked up things that like don't belong together. And like one of the other things important, like look at the fucking clock. Like that's the thing at that, like it's and not just any clock, it's like the most accurate fucking clock that we've ever came up with. And like what, like why the fuck is a clock doing this to us? You know, like it's so fascinating. And like why is this clock speaking to us in a language that like not only is unsayable, but that like the words it says are like a kind of truth that's inviolable? Like I don't know, like all this stuff is super fucked up and I love it, you know. And for me, this is what the pursuit of philosophy is. And furthermore, that like again with the Heidegger shit is, in my opinion, Heidegger's describing all of this shit through like first principles philosophy. And it's hilarious because like every other sentence I'm like underlining like Bitcoin, it's fucking Bitcoin. He's describing Bitcoin. You know, I'm like, I don't know. It's really, really phenomenal to me that like, and again, like maybe I'm just polluting this with my own thoughts, but like it seems to be that what's going on is an extremely important process of first principles, of returning to the truth through these mechanics that allow for us to unify around these greater ideals that, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, this looks like, quote unquote, the last God, not because it actually is a God in and of itself, but it's utilizing these mechanisms of truth to create a globalized shilling point that we can all interact with in such a profound way that like, I feel pretty confident that like when my ass is dead, Bitcoin will still be around. You know, granted, it's still very young, but that's why what's going on is so fucking awesome, is that like we're here in its absolute youth. We get to see it birthed out into the world. And not that there's not going to be a lot of black and dark shit along the way, but that there seems to actually be this really powerful shilling point for us to organize not only around wealth, but the coalescing of people that have these same values. I actually think that's kind of like the secret that's even more important than Bitcoin, is Bitcoiners who value a truth in such a way that they put their wealth into it. They actually put skin in the game in a much more meaningful way than anything else. You know, like we can all go to church and be like, yeah, like praise God, like leave me alone with your 7-year-old son for a while. Like I love God. He's great, super great.
Yeah, but what is buying Bitcoin? It's sacrificing yourself, the emblem of your time and energy, i.e. your money, to the values and principles represented in Bitcoin, with the assumption or the belief that you're gaining access to those values and principles. I mean, what else is, that's, you know, Bitcoin is all, that's what it is. It's us saying, oh, look, values and principles that expand the scope of what's possible for ourselves and for our interactions with the world. I'm going to subordinate myself, sacrifice my accumulated worth to that because it is so potentially valuable. And then, you know, the other kind of mind fuck is that what we conceive of as the world and even ourselves is all just a amalgam of ideas, right? And so like truth is just a word that we've come up with to represent something that's happening in here. Same with freedom, same with love, same with God. Like, you know, all these people say, well, there's no God and religion is stupid. It's like, whatever your argument might be there, this thing between our ears has generated that idea consistently everywhere for a reason. I understand that the word may carry some baggage, but the fact that, and all new ideas they wouldn't be significant to us if they didn't represent new possibilities or new potential. And so when new things enter our mind, they're literally mind expanding, right? So because our mind integrates the potential that they represent. And so when we encounter something that seems to be perhaps the purest form of truth that we've ever encountered, and the freedom that it conveys, that it represents, the possibilities and potential that it conveys, the reason why we're being so mind blasted by this thing is we're trying to integrate what its potential and what it represents into our mind that didn't have that before. And I think what we're realizing is it's a pretty massive upgrade to swallow and to contend with when you're confronted by something that appears to be what Bitcoin represents. The principles and the possibilities and potential that it represents is literally mind-blowing, basically. And our minds are still trying to contend with how to integrate that into our existing perspectives.
By the way, I think
I want to just
go ahead, Rob.
I agree with all that was said, and maybe to try and tie this together. Yeah, Bitcoin is just a clock ultimately, but the clock is a really big deal. By the way, it's like before we figured out timekeeping, we couldn't coordinate all of ourselves to dig and discover deeper, bigger things and do bigger projects. And Bitcoin ultimately, like, it's an absolute clock, right? It's the first human creation that is indeed, I'm going to use the term absolute when we talk about the absolute fixity of 21 million or absolute scarcity. I understand it's not as absolute as something transcendental like God, but it's the closest thing we've created in the sphere of human affairs that is absolute. And again, if it's a clock, it's being used to deal with the original useful fiction, which is time itself. Like, we talk about time as if it's some kind of independent dimension in the universe, but based on what I've studied, it appears to be just a useful fiction that humans develop, right? There's this, everything's changing all the time. There's a thermodynamic change, and we just ascribe this meaning to it called time. It's like our experience of entropy. We just assign this useful fiction called time. And then money seems to be the technological layer we put right on top of that. And all of this, the original, I think the root word for religion is religio. I heard from Joseph Campbell, which means to link back. So in religion or mythology more broadly, we had this data compressor for the consequences of human action. Like, we would observe a lot of sagas play out in the sphere of human affairs over time, and then we would extract from that the principles, and that those become the archetypal stories, right? And that becomes the mythology. So we're observing ourselves across time and pulling out the key lessons. That becomes a data compression of the mythology that we're using to link ourselves back to prior learnings. And what is Bitcoin doing? Bitcoin is just a blockchain. It just links back. It links back with perfect fidelity. So we know all the consequences of economic human action across the span of its existence. And just the idea of it being absolute, yet also a technological mapping onto our original useful fiction, which is time itself. And then it's supplanting the state, which used the other absolute, death, to deal with human organization, right? It's like, do this or else. So it's like a new absolute, a tool that maps onto the absolute, disrupting the status model of using, death or the threat of death as a means of human organization.
Well, like
I
that,
feel like
there's like a
has to
software
insert his quote.
upgrade. Like once your mind actually gets that, like, it does explode, because it's literally you're cramming in new software where you're like, oh shit, like, we can actually like overcome this stuff in like a meaningful way, and like that actually works. And I think what's so funny is that, like, we're at this place right now where, like, you try to like give people that software, and then just go, pfft. They're like, wait, that's not even possible. Like, how could, and like, that's one of the things I find the most fascinating about Bitcoin right now, is trying to, at least when I'm trying to like cram my crazy shit into people's head, it's just like too much for them to take on. They're just like, what do you mean we can like overcome all of this shit? Like, that's not even possible, and and I think that'll ultimately be kind of the biggest quest in the long run, is a lot of people don't want to take that software upgrade, because like it's really monumental to understand that, like, we got a more efficient clock that like makes us do things for exchange a lot better. People can't lie and obfuscate in the way that they did from the base rock before. And that gigantic apparatus that's like fucking all of us out of all of our wealth that like we purportedly need to coordinate, turns out we actually like don't need it anymore, because we got this new software upgrade. And people are just like, get out of here. Can't.
This is why I think there's also like a very compelling case to be made here for the fact that Bitcoin is fostering the accelerated evolution of human consciousness. And, that's a big statement and probably a big discussion, but just to drive home the point of like a very oversimplified, and this is just one aspect of it, you can consider like consciousness, or like your potential, the landscape in your mind of how you, like, the relevance of how your will might be expressed throughout space and time. Like, that's kind of like your internal landscape. And so what does it mean when now you know that your will can be executed? Let's say you time lock some Bitcoin over 100 years to do X, Y, and Z. Now you can, with a high degree of certainty, execute your will 100 years from now. how much does that expand the domain of relevance internally of that like will landscape that we all use to orient our and choose behaviors in the world, and which obviously have a massive impact on how we discover value and our value hierarchies and action and all that kind of stuff. And that's just like a way oversimplified example. And so if that is true, and there's all these different ways where this is expanding our minds, both, you know, in how and when we might execute our will and the possibilities of that for executing our will that might exist and all that kind of stuff, how much pressure does that put on however consciousness evolves? You know, because even though our brain is the same as it was, you know, 40,000 years ago when the first cave paintings emerged, right? Clearly consciousness has evolved, you know, in tandem with culture and ideas and all this kind of stuff. And you come into the world and you get that cultural software upgrade, and hey, Bob's your uncle, you're a person in the 21st century, and you're able to act within that. So how much does this massive software upgrade and the possibilities that it represents put pressure on all the mechanics of consciousness to upgrade themselves and to become more fit or to take advantage of the possibilities that this new software upgrade represents? And I think the answer, and then like, look at all this stuff we said about the conference and stuff. 3 years ago, that was basically non-existent. Like, I know, like in small pockets, Hodl, as you were saying, like people were kind of underground, and when you got together, it was cool. But like, from what I've heard and even my own experience, like a lot of personal change, you know, in people's lives and their families has happened in like the last 3 years. And some it's been like the last 6 months on any normal scale. And we're talking about fairly radical changes in perspective, more hope, more ambition, more energy, more enthusiasm, more connectedness, more beauty, more love, all that kind of stuff. On any scale, like 3 years is nothing. It's inconceivable that that level of change can happen, you know, on so quickly. And again, I mean, there's kind of an interesting parallel to the psychedelic realm again, because people report that, you know, having a mystical or psychedelic experience can help reframe like 30 years of pathological thinking. And now they're, you know, they're more properly oriented in the world. They're more hopeful about the future. They're more emotionally stable, less substance abuse, all that kind of stuff. But if we just roll this out, you know, 50 years into the future, if that's like how much change has been crammed into 3 years, and that, you know, the ball is very much just getting rolling here, in my opinion, how much pressure does it put on how, whatever the process of the evolution of consciousness is, how much pressure does it put on that? And seems to be like worth discussing, at least.
I think that, you know, we were talking about the Ethereum guys want to have immortality in the sense that their physical bodies want to last forever, you know, for whatever reason. That's being able to exert your will in the future is true immortality, right? To some degree. I mean, if you can affect change 1,000 years from now, that's pretty wild to think about, right? And so I think like, you know, it's like Eric was talking about, like, you know, people can't even fathom that this is possible. And I think sometimes when people do allow themselves to become open-minded to that concept, they overshoot and they think everything is possible. And that's like shitcoin land. It's like, oh, we can do, Bitcoin went from 0 to 42, so we can do everything we want, everything imaginable, like anything you can think of, the world is your oyster. And like, no, there are real constraints and physical limits here, and fundamentals and first principles. And like, it's like the founding of America. It's equivalent to the founding of America, right? If you're going to set up a country that's going to greatly outlast you, like, and you're going to affect your will on the future, well, you have to be a really studied person, reasoned person. You have to go to, like, you know, you have to give freedoms in places where you wouldn't necessarily allow there to be freedoms in your time. Like, you have to go to core, to principle, in order to even begin to think that you're good enough to have your will, you know, take place, like, and affect things in the future. And if you're not willing to go through that, like, rigorous self-discipline in order to come to the correct conclusions, because these conclusions actually have very little to do with you and your ego, but they are just what is and what should be, unless you're willing to do the work to sift through to get to that, like, you really shouldn't, you don't deserve it, you know?
I'm like looking at Hayek.
I think
there's a really great passage on restraint. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jason.
Well, So I'm reading Heidegger's Contributions to Philosophy, which also known as like the event, where he's essentially talking about like when humans return to truth in like the most meaningful way, like it manifests as this like totality of a human event that occurs for kind of everybody at the same time, and that like it brings all human beings back into their own consciousness and relation to like being, which he spells with a Y, which is like the most fundamental idea of like who and what we can be. And part of that is only done through self-restraint and the enduring and the enactment of truth as being. And to me, like this is what that same restraint is. And to like, I tweeted about this the other night because I was reading this, was that like to think of the sort of restraint that Satoshi needed to not only like mine Bitcoin and cultivate the whole project, but then to walk away. Like it, you know, it's literally a superhuman kind of restraint that like he made himself an example to all of us with, and goes to show like what our own personal restraint towards our vision towards the future operates. So instead of us borrowing a bunch of money against the future, we're actually taking that money we could spend today and putting away for the future. And it's like this whole reorientation to value restraint versus like overinflated ideas about today versus tomorrow. And it's really profound because it's this whole shifting and realignment of values in a meaningful way, which ironically, like, you know, we're unlocking immortality insofar that we can actually reach out into the future and interact with it. But it's not because we're saying, hey, I deserve to live forever. It's saying I am willing through my own restraint of what I could spend and do today to give that to the future and for the glory that, you know, it could be.
And how much more powerful does that land in the world when you think that that action is, you've willed that action, but you're no longer around to derive the benefit from the action. So it's like just pure whatever the action is. Like if it's a charitable action, it's like pure charity or pure compassion or pure love. It's not quote unquote tainted by whatever feedback would come to the originator of that action, you know, because you've done it absent you being around to accrue the benefit. You know, just an interesting thought.
No, it's like I still have warm, fuzzy feelings for George Washington because of this, you know.
For who?
George Washington, right? It's like, even though he was a slave owner.
He was
he set all of his slaves free when he died.
Yeah.
You know, earlier we were talking about the Ethereum guys talking about surviving death, and they even say it more. There's more BS behind it. They talk about conquering death, right? Like disrupting death and all of this nonsense. You know, the idea of the individual consciousness surviving death, I think, is the Fiat version of just creating a true, meaningful legacy. Like realizing the finitude of your own egoic existence, and therefore striving to live beyond it, right? You want to create some meaning, that create life beyond yourself. You know, children is the very obvious path to this, but there's also just the legacy that you create in the world. And I don't know, it just seems to be another one of those like first order thinking problems where like, oh, if only I could survive death, like your I is somehow this special indivisible whole, and not seeing that. I think that the best way to understand reality, and if you take psychedelics, you probably experience this directly, like there is no separation, right? It is this stack of interacting patterns all the way up and all the way down. Everything influences everything else. There's reciprocity across the board. It's all vibrational, you know, frequency, energetic, whatever you want to call it. And I think for me, that helps me understand why truth maximalism, I think as Casey said earlier, was imbued into me by Bitcoin. It's not like I came into Bitcoin looking for the deep philosophical truth. I came for the profit, stayed for the prophecy kind of thing. But once you get embraced with it, the absolute starts to permeate you back, because you're just a pattern too. You're a pattern, but now you've coalesced to something that's a pattern that doesn't move, like it's an invariant or a constant. It's very close to truth, so it starts to change you from the inside out. And that, you know, I think this is why I've called Bitcoin as something like the capstone of capitalism. We've been looking for this perfect storehouse of time, energy, or even just something simple like favors, right? The economy, we're just trading favors with one another. Like I go and do a thing. If I do it well, I get some profits and I can go redeem, use those profits to redeem favors from other people in other lines of work. And with Bitcoin, it's like, instead of relying on, I guess, coercion to redeem those favors, where you're always like in the shadow of the law, or, you know, use this money or accept this money as else, we're using freedom ultimately. And it's something that, it's an absolute that people can coalesce around voluntarily, whereas the state model was an absolute that was being imposed on people, like the fear of death, frankly, to organize human affairs. So yeah, those Ethereum kids are just whack in the head, because nobody's going to live forever. That's like the zombie company equivalent of individual consciousness. Like, accept your death, accept it with resoluteness, and then live accordingly.
Very well said.
And I don't just want to player hate on the Ethereum kids, because at the end of the day, like, I think they're closer to us than no coiners. And so, like, I always want to create the opening to, like, welcome them. And, like, I think there's just some key fundamental errors in a lot of their thought, and a lot of it hasn't focused deeper on fiat and some of these other core things that are going on. So I think that's important.
I honestly hate how much we've been talking about them, not because I hate them, but because it's so irrelevant in my life that I'm just like, why are we doing this?
Well,
but go ahead.
I mean,
on the death thing, I think it's interesting because, like, there's this Peter Thiel quote, which is, he basically says that, like, death is natural, and so people say you shouldn't fight against death, and he believes that there's nothing more natural than to fight against death. And I would just flip it a little bit and say there's nothing more natural than to fight for life, but there is something unnatural about fighting against death. You're supposed to die. You're supposed to clear the way for the young. It's like Steve Jobs gave this speech basically about how evolution probably tried to evolve without death in the beginning and found it very difficult because it made no space for new things. And so there is no change without death, and death is a constant, and we need death, and we should be thankful for our own deaths. You know what I mean? And it's I
think it's the ultimate.
Like, look at the world. I was just gonna say, look at the world around us, and, like, the gerontocracy that rules our lives, right? I mean, Joe Biden doesn't know what room he's in. He doesn't know where he is, right? And yet he's supposed to be the leader of the free. He's supposed to be the leader of the free world, and it's like, it's not his fault. Like, frankly, like, if you look at interviews of him when he was young, he was very sharp, very on top of it. But you're useful from about the ages of 35 to 65. Pre-35, you're just too goddamn stupid, like, frankly. And I said I'm under 35 right now. I'm a retard. I shouldn't be running things, right? Under 35, you're too stupid. Over 65, you're too old, and all your ideas are outdated. So you should get out of there. Like, the battlefield, the arena, is for people in the prime of their life, right? And we have all these old people basically sitting on top of change, not allowing it to happen, and decreeing things left and right in order, like, do you think that we would have had the COVID response that we had if we didn't have a bunch of octogenarians running society? No, of course, because they're the most fucking vulnerable. And so these people, they basically say, well, if I'm at risk, then everybody should stop every activity that they're doing. We should put masks on toddlers. They're fully divorced from the world in which they inhabit, and they're looking to inflict pain on the young, right? And it's sort of like this. There's been more suicides amongst people under 30 than like over the last 2-year time span than ever before in American history. And it's sort of like a weird culling of the young by the old. And it's just everything with fiat and the baby boomer generation and all the things that we know in recent history. It's an error. We've thrown an error in the blockchain of humanity. You are fucking supposed to leave the next generation, like what Eric was talking about earlier. You're supposed to push value into the future, not extract value from the future. You were supposed to leave more behind than you got. And the fact that we're not doing this lets us know that things are desperately wrong and they need to be course corrected. And when it's our time, when we are the old men sitting there and we have all the money and none of the ideas, I hope we all shut the fuck up and we listen to the young people and we go with what they're thinking, because like our time will have been over at that point.
Yes, and it's interesting, like, you know, in tribal cultures and stuff, like the elders, who are ostensibly like the most wise, are not the leaders. They're the elders. Like the leaders go and consult them because they've been around for a long time and they had lots of wisdom, but they don't have like let's say the compendium or the collection of qualities necessary to truly lead, you know. And I think that speaks to, you know, your point there to some degree. And I think the whole like life extension thing, I very much agree with what Rob said. I mean, I think it's the ultimate like fiat or ego move. Like, I need to exist into the future. Well, what is most eternal about you? What are you most able to transmute or express as an individuated self while you're alive? Like, it's certainly not your sports team and your name and your preferences and all that kind of stuff. I think it's what we've been discussing this whole time, the things that are eternal, which we are learning our best to orient ourselves by, which is truth, freedom, beauty, love, these sorts of things. And like, I think if you express them while living, that's how you access eternity. That's what living forever is being a vessel for those things while alive, such that it doesn't matter that much if you're around for 80 years or 800 years. I mean, maybe it would be better if you could put that into the world for longer, but the very desire to do that kind of contradicts your priorities on what you're around to do. And so I think, again, we're into this space where like people aren't sufficiently humble to the correct things. They're not orienting themselves properly, let's say. And it's causing all these perverse desires and ambitions like living forever. And the final point Rob was saying about how there's this coherence between all levels of reality, or at least that's something that's been put forward, and it makes a lot of sense to me, kind of the macrocosm, microcosm thing. That's what having integrity is. It's being integrated with all levels of being in reality, let's say, as coherently or as well fit as possible. And I think the reason why when we say someone has integrity, we mean it as a good thing, I think that necessarily speaks to the goodness of creation, of reality. Like, I don't think if you're properly, you know, existing in the world and properly existing with all those different patterns at every layer of existence, I think you have to operate under the assumption that like goodness is what fundamentally permeates existence. If you're going to say that someone who's properly integrated and say that they have integrity is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, totally. I agree.
I gotta ask, so like, you know, I love these conversations and I love you guys for, you know, woo, you know, good feelings. But so like
I feel like a butt is coming.
Yes, but what do we do now? Do we just keep doing what we're doing here, or like like, I feel good about my work, but like so much of this has been kind of like this wacky creative process that's been out of my hands. I feel like I'm supposed to do something like more concerted and effortful, but like I feel like
great question.
You know,
that's not even like my method of function. So I'm not sure what to really do.
To some degree, I think that early Bitcoiners do occupy like the elder position in a way, and that you know, if you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you've been wrong often enough, and you found yourself off sides, and like we don't really have like we still don't have a good handle around what this thing is, and so it's like, I don't know, my what I've been doing recently is just like investing in Bitcoin startups and giving advice to young entrepreneurs and stuff like that, and just basically being like, listen, man, I've been grappling with infinity for the last, you know, 8 years. I don't fucking know. Here's the best I've come up with, you know, like, and that's about all. Like, other than that, it's like just clear space for the young, like this gatekeeping that sometimes happens in Bitcoin. I'm not a big fan of. It's like, however, the young Bitcoiners, like the new guys, like they have a different bent on this whole thing than I do. And it's like, I think for me, it's partially just like step out of their way and just let them experience this for themselves, I guess, you know.
And
then I get with it, and then I get with you guys, and I go, rah, 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 these young Bitcoiners, how dare they? You know, back in my day, we had to walk uphill both ways to get an open dime, you know, whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, Eric, to your point, I mean, I think this is an eternal question. Like you're always at every stage of your life, every day, you're going to be asking this question. Like, you know, you wake up, you're conscious, you're free, or at least you have some freedom. What do you do? How do you apply yourself? How do you apply your limited time and attention? You know? And I mean, I think we all struggle with that, but I think it's right at the beginning of this conversation, we started talking about like, well, one, how do you orient your perspective such that you're sensitizing your awareness to notice what is most relevant? And then I think, you know, there's a faith in acting upon the things that produce the most salience to you in a certain way, you know, and also you have to, I think the whole like Buddhist or whatever thing about, you know, not necessarily desiring for, or Taoist, you know, Taoist way of not necessarily desiring outcomes. I'm not saying like you can get away with that exclusively, but if you're orienting yourself properly and you're sensitizing your awareness to see the things that are most significant, you might just have to pursue certain paths without really knowing exactly what's on the other end of them. So if you feel like spending an inordinate amount of time every day, like writing about something that you're not sure if more than 100 people are ever going to read, well, maybe you should just go ahead and do that, because the fact that it's so compelling to you and it's capturing your attention so much, maybe that means something that you can't fully understand. You know, I often go back to Peterson, you know, and I'm sure we're all big fans of his. I'm sure we all have critiques of him, but the fact that he wrote his first book, it took him over 15 years, and he was not famous Mr. Peterson then. He was a fucking college professor and a psychologist, right? And so how the fuck can you justify spending all that time? And that book is like a commentary on, like, you know, it's basically the next level on religion, right? It's trying to really, put forward novel insights about human consciousness, value, meaning, religion, etc. And how can you go to that well every day for 15 years, making sure you get it exactly perfect? Nope, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. Okay, that sentence works. On to the next one. Keep going, keep going. Your families, you're like, hey, Jordan, come, it's dinner time. I want to go to the park. I want to do this and that. Nope. I don't know why this is relevant, and I need to devote myself to it. And he didn't know he was going to become famous and wealthy and all the rest of it for it. He just knew this is compelling my behavior in some way. I have to listen to it, even though it may be a complete sacrifice. Like I may sacrifice those 15 years and get nothing for it. And that book was not like on the New York Times list or anything like that. He didn't get any notoriety after that came out. It was like 2 decades later almost, because that was published in 97 or 98. And, you know, he popped on the scene on Rogan in like 2016 that he started to get notoriety. And now, you know, he's done very well for himself. But I think I often think when I'm spending too much time thinking about these things and trying to articulate my thoughts in writing, like he didn't know, but he felt there was a value in pursuing it. And I think to a certain degree, you got to trust your gut. You do your best to see clearly, to develop a perspective that is optimally tuned to what's most important. And then when that produces a compulsion, like saying, hey, motherfucker, why can't you stop thinking about this? There's got to be a reason. You got to be like, yeah, all right, you're probably right. So I'm going to do it, even though it's creating a kind of chaos in my world, or I can't rationalize it fully right now.
Damn it, John. I wanted you to just like have a good concept. Yeah, like it's such a love-hate thing. Like I really enjoy when I get these like rhymozones of great stuff, but then like 9 tenths of the other time I'm like, what the fuck are these people saying? Like why am I reading this shit? Like what the fuck is Heidegger saying? And yeah, like the whole thing is just this painful and difficult addiction. And then I like huck the motherfucker away. I'm like, fuck you. I'm like, what was he saying? And I like go back and get him. I'm like, oh god damn it. And it's fucking agonizing. And it's nice that now more people are like coming along, but like, god damn it. It's hard.
But this
is
the pursuit,
you know, trying to
value.
Explore this.
This is kind of the pursuit,
and I mean,
of value. You like, and this is kind of the dark night of the soul idea. Who coined that originally? Was it Albert Magnus?
Right? No,
I think it was Albert Magnus.
I think it's actually. I thought it was a religious
in any
term
case,
that was utilized before, but
Yeah. But Albert Magnus was like a 15th century, I want to say, like religious scholar, philosopher, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Maybe earlier, actually, maybe earlier. But anyways, it wasn't like, you have a personal difficult time and you got to struggle through it. It was not knowing precisely the value that you're trying to orient yourself by or move towards, but like finagling or falling ass backwards your way toward it regardless. And the highest value, let's call the highest value God, the thing that most orients you, whether it's, building a business or whether it actually is some ineffable value. But the dark night of the soul was like, of course you want clarity to be like, hey, tell me what I need to do to be optimally satisfied and get to the place where things are going to be great and I'm going to be happy with myself. Just give me like the straight line and I'll follow it. Yeah, no fucking shit you would. Right. But it doesn't work that way. The dark night of the soul is pursuing the thing of greatest value, absent a certainty that you're going about it the right way. And there's something beautiful in the journey there, obviously.
Yeah. You're in the middle now. And in the middle, you get lost. That's what the middle is, Things will be certain later.
Very succinct. Yeah, and it's all like, this is still very early in everyone's journey, but like you got to appreciate the type of love that you get at an event like the one we were just at. I mean, it doesn't necessarily give you the feedback to say, hey man, like you're on the right course, double down, but it at a minimum is probably not feedback that says, hey, stop entirely what you're doing and go in a different direction.
Right.
I've heard that one. Hey, but by the way, like you sound like a fucking moron. You really need to stop and like check out these equity markets and things. That's where the future is. I don't know. It's just amazing how often still just encountering people in the way I want to talk about this. Like it's so hard for me when people are like, yeah, like tell me, I'm curious about Bitcoin. Like give me a little bit that, I have such a hard time like reducing the nozzle on the fire hose to not like blow their head off immediately.
Bro, I never talk about Bitcoin anymore with anyone other than like you guys and on podcasts. If people ask me what I do, I tell them I work in media or something. I don't care. I don't really care about orange pilling people. Doesn't get me off really. I'd rather just have a nice exchange with someone and go on about my day. And, if we do an activity together, like if we train together, if we fucking run together, whatever, that's great. But they don't need to know that I'm a crazy Bitcoin person necessarily. So I just don't engage in it much these days.
We're in that steakhouse last night and I overheard, we're about to get up and leave. We're paying the bill. And there's a table behind me of like 7 or 8 guys talking about inflation. And they're like, well, you see the inflation's really high. So they have to increase the interest rate to keep the economy from overheating. He's like giving this long, sophisticated, I don't know, I guess I had 2 glasses of wine and it's starting to get up to leave. And I'm like, I didn't want to say anything, but then I had to say something. I was like, listen, guys, like, I'm sorry, but everything you think you know about.
My name's Robert Breedlove.
Inflation, you probably don't. Inflation, it's just theft. The US dollar, like every fiat currency, is a pyramid scheme. I hope you'll look into this. Bitcoin is a vote against all this nonsense. You're being robbed, basically. And I just left it at that. And they seemed a bit flabbergasted, but appreciative at the same time. They're like, oh yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So I agree with you. I don't want to orange pill anybody, but I also feel kind of impelled to just, that's probably a bit of an overture where I'm actually eavesdropping and interjecting into someone else's conversation. But if someone's going to talk to me about inflation or concerns about the monetary system, I do feel impelled to at least give them a limb of, hey, look at this thing that we all talk about forever. Maybe it will help you. There's an earlier point you guys are talking about what to do like now in the Bitcoin world. And I'm a big believer in that idea of just whatever interests you, whatever you're into, whatever calls you to action, because there's some fittedness there. There's some fittedness between whatever you're packing and what the demand is, that it's calling you into that for a reason. And so the more you can step into that role, whatever it may be, independent and agnostic of economic concerns, I think the better it is. The better you are, like you'll enjoy the work more, you'll do better work. So your customers or whoever's on the other end of that will be happier. And hopefully that's what Bitcoin is like moving us toward, where everyone's just doing the work that they want to the degree that they want and the amount that they want. I mean, intuitively, that creates a much fucking better world. Everyone's happier at work. Everyone's happier with the product of other people's work. And I use that principle really to, as a litmus test for the conversations I have on the show. Like, I want to talk to people I find interesting. Hey, I'm really curious about this topic or book or subject, and let me talk to the person that I think would be a good fit for that. I'm also using it to curate my reading list. So instead of trying to read things that, I don't know, other people may have recommended, or if whatever reason you think you should read something, putting that subordinate to whatever you're actually interested in, and giving yourself the freedom to like put books down, skip ahead, skip back. I think all of this is really important to just reading the right things. And I don't know, I get, what are we back to? We're back to freedom, right? Like just this freedom to move around and try different things, sense different things, and see what's fit. And when you find what's fit for you, there's some percolation from that. Like once I find the thing that's fit for me, I'm doing the thing I want to do, all of a sudden the people around me start to benefit more. So, you know, you want that for other people too. I want other people to be doing what they want to do, because that means when I go to the marketplace to buy a good or service, people are showing up at my doorstep that are doing what they want to do. So yeah, it seems so fucking obvious in a way, but we're far away from it today.
I only
funny because I asked that because I asked that because like I was vibing with people at the conference, and like I kind of got in my cadence of doing it where, you know, eventually I was like, look, like we're meeting like right now, so like I can tell you I was sent by God to have this moment with you where I can tell you that like you need to contribute to Bitcoin in your specific and unique way that you have just shared with me, and you now have a purposeful task to share that with the greater community. And like it just felt really fucking good to just go deep and just like throw off all of the bullshit and just go like wham. And I miss that. And like and again, like that's why stuff's, I don't want to say it's depressing out here. Like I love my life and where I'm at, but you know, it was so nourishing to just get to have these interactions, be like, yeah, we're participating in the, you know, the recreation of all this goodness in the world and sharing it. And yeah, Rob, I think you're totally right in that, you know, we each have our own unique thing that we're bringing to the table. You know, and mine seems to be pursuing this kind of insane philosophical bent. And as frustrating and difficult as it is, you know, like I clearly have some sadomastic relationship with it because I continually return to it. So
I think, you know, push will wear you out. If you're trying to push on the world to, you know, affect change, you're just going to get tired. You're going to get exhausted. But if you feel pulled to do something, like you're just going to keep doing it over and over and over again. So I only do things like I feel called to do or whatever, you know, and like, it's like, I don't know, man, like fucking 5 years ago, I wasn't AmericanHodl. This is like a fugue state. I'm in like still in my fugue state, you know. Just keep going, doing whatever. I don't know. It just comes to me.
It's awesome. You know, I think it's what you're all saying is like the freedom to pursue what you determine to be most valuable, not ultimately most valuable, but like immediately most valuable, and a faith that will lead to increasing value over time. And like, you know, maybe this is the idea of the logos or something, your ability to discern that and your freedom to do that. And Bitcoin is obviously granting people that freedom. But to your point, Eric, like I think a lot of people, and this is part of the reason why everyone wants to work in Bitcoin, you know, like once you get orange pill, people are like, I want to quit my fiat job and work in Bitcoin, is because we just weren't brought up, educated, or conditioned to be able to contend with freedom. You know, it was always like, do this test and take this exam and get on this career track. And this is how it's going to go. And this is what you'll get. And this is the status. And this is the money. And this is the family. And this is the picture. And that's what you're supposed to want. But when people can accumulate savings and protect those savings and know that they're going to be there for them in the future. And obviously at this point in the adoption cycle, that you gain particularly from that action, well, then you're confronted with something that a lot of us just have never been confronted with. And that's, hey, you're free. What do you want to do? Like, what is going to fulfill you now that the kind of monkey is off your back? Like, and it's not an easy question. You think it's an easy question to answer, like, oh, I'm going to do what I want all the fucking time, like hang out with my friends and eat chocolate chip cookies and watch Netflix and go to the beach and whatever. It's going to be wonderful. And you might do that for a little while. And then you realize, oh no, that's not fulfilling. That's not meaningful. And so then the task becomes, what can I engage in? What can I give myself up to that's going to deliver to me the greatest meaning, the most value? And I think that's something that we've abdicated, or we've been forced to abdicate because we've been put in a position of artificial deprivation and a certain type of conditioning and education, all the different forces that confuse us and take us off that track. But I think a lot of us are, and more in the future, will come to a position, Eric, you were saying earlier about like the legacy of generations of families. Like, certainly if we can maintain the accrued capital from one generation to the next, then, it's not going to take many generations before, when you turn 18 in your family can be like, look, you don't necessarily, you have financial security. So what do you want to pursue that's going to be most valuable or meaningful to you? And in this world that we're in, that's so fucked up and so deceiving and so corruption and lies everywhere, I can appreciate, I think we can all appreciate that it's not super easy to find the track of most meaning, of most fulfillment. But here we are now with the opportunity, and our very dedication to that process is what is going to contribute to the building and the manifestation of that culture and future that we always talk about and dream of. It's people doing that and committing themselves to it that actually brings it about. So, it's a beautiful question, and it's a beautiful process. And I'm insanely grateful that it's been made available to us through this emerging phenomenon. But it doesn't mean it's not challenging, and you will not have the certainty at the outset. So that's why, as many of us have said, like, you've got to establish as much clarity you can around the principles or values that you think are most validly orienting you, and then allow your trust in your attention, trust in your interest, trust in your curiosity, and go there, and then put in the work, right? Lift the wood, carry the water, or chop the wood, carry the water.
One of the greatest things, John, like to the point you just talked about, is that, back to this point about greed we were talking about earlier, is like, number go up. You can think about it like as an unlock of humanity. So like every new, order of magnitude, Bitcoin goes up, this many more humans get unlocked to go live their true potential, which, like, isn't it fucking hilarious that this is the same argument that the communists make, that the AOCs make? Like, we're going to unlock your human potential. Like, Bitcoin's actually doing it, bitch. We're doing it right now. Huh? Get some Bitcoin, son. Come on. Like, it's true. I just do Bitcoin all day long and whatever the fuck I want. I do Bitcoin. I do things I'm called to do. I wouldn't be doing that if Bitcoin's price hadn't gone up. I can do that because Bitcoin continues to go up in value. The more it goes up in value, the more people get unlocked. It's fucking beautiful.
And the crazy thing is, it's not like in fiat land or even shitcoin land where you get that and it's all about the self-gratifying endeavors that you might be able to afford now. Like, you drop in on this conversation or in any conversation happening, at the Bitcoin conference around, maximalists, truth maximalists, whatever you want to call them. And everyone's like, what can I pursue that's more meaningful, or that can help contribute to this thing, or that, like, that's what people are trying to figure out. Not just like, how do I maximize gratification?
Well, the best for me is that the schizophrenia of like finance, and because like if you have a stock and it goes way up, it's like, oh, I gotta cash out and like put it somewhere else, and now I gotta have my 401k, and like the fact that all that shit is just set aside, and it's like, like number went up some more, like that's nice, like good to have, not even that it's really more security, but like that's just cool. Like now I go to my other, and like I think that's one thing that fiat folk don't understand is that like there's not like a number that we cash out at. Like it's a fucking one-way street, and that's it. And that's what's so satisfying.
The number
is
is
that
zero.
Schizophrenia of financing. Yeah, that is the number we cash out at.
It's
zero.
well, it's either zero in Bitcoin or zero in fiat. One of them is going to be worthless at the end of the day. So we'll cash out that. You know?
That's how I'm going to answer the question from now on. Is there, what price is it? At zero. It's when fiat is worth zero. That's when we cash out.
Yeah.
We keep talking. Keep going back to this. I said it earlier, like it's all patterns, right? So one of the things that I think has really been deeply viewed upon me by being in Bitcoin, there is no way between the reality that you want or imagine or desire and its realization other than work. Like there is no, that is the sole path. There's only one path. Like you're at A, you want to be at B. Well, fucking guess what? But you're going to be doing some work. But we have this fiat reality where we say, oh no, you can just, there's a self-deceit here that we can just impose our opinion on others to create the reality that we want. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere. So we're going to tax the carbon producer, and that's going to solve the problems. And it's an inversion of this reality where you have to work to move from A to B, and instead you can just yell about your pronouns or your political beliefs and threaten to beat people over the head to create your desired reality, not acknowledging all the externalities that creates. Like you're imposing on people, so they're going to go elsewhere, they're going to deceive you, it's this endless process of deceit. And so this idea of work, like I guess if you had to boil it all the way down, like what is Bitcoin or what is it doing to us? It's just reacquainting us with the noble pursuit of work. Like you need to get off your ass, use your mind, use your hands, work intelligently, work diligently to create the reality that you ultimately want. And when you synthesize the plurality of people doing that and remove as much coercion as possible, right? Where if someone does want to, say, take from you, they don't really have the ability to do that, then that creates the best world. That's the kingdom of heaven thing we always talk about, in my estimation. People think we sound like crazy loco. Oh, you're trying to make heaven on earth. That sounds like, some type of sacrilege or whatever. It's like, no, I'm just saying the closest thing we can get to a metaphysical heaven within physical reality is something like this world where we're all doing what we want. We don't face the risk of violation of our property by the whims of others, and we're all incentivized to just to move and to act intelligently in the world. Like that sounds pretty fucking great. And Bitcoin may not get us all the way there, but it is such a catapult forward. It's hard to overstate.
I think one of the reasons, I agree with you, Rob, and I think one of the reasons why you hear in a lot of different traditions that like work is not glorious. I know there's a lot of fucked up like stuff with communism where they kind of hijack this notion, but work is the decision to take a certain action. Inherent in that is a value judgment. And so work can be construed as which values or ideals are you going to elevate through the application of your scarce resources. Now, you might say exclusively me. That might be an answer. And I think maybe that's a very fiat or egotistical approach to say all the activities that I engage in, all the sacrifices I make are for me. But you might also say, well, actually, I think the ideal or the principle or the value of truth or of freedom or of love actually supersede my, the notion of me. And so when I take work, I'm actually going to glorify them by sacrificing what I have toward those ends or elevating those ideals by either speaking the truth or contributing to something that, brings more of those things into the world. And so again, it's like a very sort of religious notion because you're giving something of yourself to see something else rise. Now, it's always a mix, right? Because we do things for ourselves necessarily. We're physiological beings in the world. So we have to do things to feed ourselves and get enjoyment and emotional stability and all the rest of it. But an element, I think, of at least what we all aspire to do is to have the sacrifices we make contribute to the elevation of things that are more eternal or grander than ourselves. Basically be vehicles for their elevation or expression in the world.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
There you go, baby.
Amen to that. And again, we've talked about truth a lot today, but just it is consistent with the truth, right? Like the truth of humanity is whatever one person figures out, the nature of knowledge or information or human reason, if you will. Like one guy figures it out, one guy figures out the wheel or electricity or whatever the earth-shattering innovation, then it propagates forward virtually indefinitely as long as we don't slip into the dark ages again. So honor that principle that the guy got to fucking electricity or the wheel with, which was freedom, human reason, private property, and just let the rest self-organize versus the state model of I'm going to beat you over the head to organize things and draw an invisible line. If anyone crosses it, we're going to blow them up. We'll take their money. You know, like all this, it's I don't know, moving away from this self-defeating cancerous behavior in humanity and towards just human flourishing, right? Acting as a single organism in a way, something like that, by having an inviolable neurotransmitter of money we call Bitcoin.
Amen. You know, it's interesting, Rob, and I thought you did a great job with Peterson. He's obviously notoriously difficult to cajole and like keep on point and on topic and not let him just take up 45 minutes for like a simple question like what are you working on these days or something. So like I commend you for, you know, hitting some of the big questions that you wanted to hit and reining him in. But it was interesting to hear him kind of contradict himself, I felt, when he said, you know, like, yes, of course, emergent order is by far the more sustainable and the better order than a top-down, you know, plan and control sort of thing. But then one of his concerns with Bitcoin is like, well, if you need someone to step in, nobody can step in. And do we really want that? You know, and I felt like those were kind of mutually exclusive. Like, is it good that no one can step in or isn't it? And what type of order do you want established? And yeah, I wanted to say that earlier, so I'm bringing it up now. I also wanted to ask you just what was it like for you? You know, you pulled off this massive coup and doing a live thing with Peterson, and we didn't have much time to chat afterwards, but you know, what was it like? That's, you know, 200 people or whatever it was showed up to listen to you have a live discussion with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I think you know, first there seemed to be this, he has a thing again about Bitcoin and the implications of it, that they're just so profound that he defaults to this answer of like, oh, it could never work. So I don't know what that means exactly. It's almost, I mean, I guess you could have been looking at something like the American Revolution, which is like the rough analogy I had in mind. And you could see it starting and be like, oh, this thing's never going to fucking work. Who do these people think they are? They're going up against the greatest imperial power on the planet, and this little ragtag 13 state bullshit is going to fight against these people. What are you talking about? But, you know, it did work out, and you know, whatever, history's changed. So I haven't quite gotten my head around that, but as far as the actual experience of doing the thing with him felt very smooth and intuitive to me. I think we had 650 or 700 people there. Like, I had a lot of help with the event. I could give unlimited shout outs right now to everyone that made it come together. It was just a dream and a vision, but it came to fruition thanks to the help of so many people. I did this weird thing to prep for it for the week before, which is I just listened to a lot of Peterson podcasts. I've already read a lot of his work, so I started reviewing the Maps of Meaning PDF, which I think, Dallas, I've shared with you. We got all these highlights and notes in it. And so by the time we get on stage and he's talking, I almost had the ability to preempt a lot of his thoughts and perspectives because like I know where he's going with this, right? Like he starts down a particular path and I'm like, oh, I know this, I know that. And I think it helped a lot, but there was still, when I reviewed our episode, I still like, it wasn't, I think I could have done better. You know, maybe I'm being hypercritical of myself, but he still dominates the conversation. You know, you're trying to get a question out, it's multi-step, and he'll interrupt you at step 3 of 8 and interject something else.
Yeah.
And then you're like trying to deal with that tangent and get back to the original point. So I hope it came off really well in general, but I think I learned a lot in the process. And, you know, I hope to do it again because ultimately, when I say do it again, I mean do this type of event with other prolific thinkers just live. I think, you know, live dialogue of any kind is very important, but the live dialogue is a whole nother game because the you know you have the dialogue between the two people, but then there's the dialogue with the audience in real time. And yeah, we'll see. I hope Peterson becomes thoroughly orange pilled over the next couple of years.
On Twitter, I think yesterday, that something with Peterson and Saylor's in the works. Now that's one of those things that like everyone would get super excited about. It might just be a total flop because they're not their communication styles are not very compatible. But is that something that's actually in the works?
So the original idea for this event was actually going to be myself interviewing Peterson and Saylor, but Saylor said something really interesting to me when I pitched this, and he goes, "Hey, you know, it's a really bad look for a billionaire to charge money to an event to show up and talk about money." I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." And so he agreed. So he was like, "I would love to do this, but it needs to be a free event and needs to be free for a million people on YouTube or whatever else," which again speaks to his deeper principled approach to the world that I admire and respect. So when I met with Peterson in the green room and we started talking about what we're going to talk about, I just put my cards on the table and said, "Look, one of my ulterior motives today, I had a few. One of them is to connect you and Michael Saylor because I think you two are two of the most brilliant living people on earth. And I don't care if this is on my show, your show, his show, in private, whatever. You guys just need to fucking talk, frankly." So when I say it's in the works, that's what's in the works. I'm just trying to get them talking and trust that whatever needs to happen will happen from there. So
cool. Well, I look forward to that. I know you probably all have to leave. So any last words before we shut this one down? I feel like it's been ages since the last one. When was it? December?
It's been a while. Yeah. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you know, you just gotta keep fucking hodling, bro. I mean, what else is there to say? Hodl when it's exciting, a hodl when it's boring, a hodl when you're sad, a hodl when you're happy. Like just every day. Listen, you're gonna wake up every single day for the next 5,000 days, probably hopefully for the rest of your life, and say to yourself, is today the day I sell Bitcoin? And you're gonna look in the mirror and respond, no. And when you get to the end of that life, it sounds like a pretty good fucking life, you know?
And you're gonna stack all the while as hard as you can. Eric, Rob, any last words?
No. Can you guys even hear me right now? My fucking
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, keep hodling. Join us. Like participate in like all like whatever crazy fucking way that you want to contribute, just do that because that's all that I'm doing. And so I hope you'll also do that. And it's good. Yeah, I don't know. This whole shit's just wild. And I'm just really happy that I get to be here and participate and that I'm not just like on my lonely journey anymore. So, and I love you guys and getting to do these hodl hangs. It's great. And yeah, it's just always fun. And yeah, it does feel like it was like 3 years ago that we did this for some reason.
Yeah.
We all need to end up in the redwoods on psilocybin up near Eric's place. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. That's all I'm going to say.
Everybody seems to want to do that. So let's coordinate in our Telegram and figure out a time for everybody to do that. Because yeah, the other is we could like. The other one I thought is because a bigger one is I want to rent out a hot springs and like, get like 120 people to do it. But a more intimate one is I should rent like a smaller house, and we should get at least the 4 of us, and then maybe a handful of other select people that you think, and
120
just hang out
people
for like.
tripping
let's
is
do,
quite
let's
a hornet's nest of potential disaster.
Yeah. So
no, it'll be great. It'll be great, John. And when people show up, we'll just be like, "You're not a cop, are you? Because you got to tell us." Okay.
Yeah, it's the rule. But I think something small, a little more intimate, with maybe 8 to 10 people, us and a few other select people within our cohort could be pretty fun. So let's rap more about that in a private group and see where that goes. Because yeah, I'd love to have you guys up here. I was thinking about this morning. I went for a walk out on the bluffs, and I was just like looking at the beautiful clouds and fucking whales out there doing their spouts and fucking seals, and I was like,
Amazing.
Why am I not sharing this with all my friends that I love? So yeah, come up this way. Let's do it.
Nice.
We were arm in arm at one point at that last event at Sailor's Barbecue, and there just seemed to be no perceivable friction at all. Like I don't know what it is about Bitcoin.
Love, baby.
You just know that they know that what you know, and it's like fucking what, like there's no blockage. You're just like, oh, this came up and here it is, and then you throw it back. And so to try and create more of that in the world seems like a really good idea. I don't know. I've been using this kind of moniker, the raising an army of educators, which is just orange pilling more people that can then orange pill others in their own unique vernacular or filter or whatever. That seems like a really good idea. And as far as hodling, just strive to sell Bitcoin only when you absolutely have to, and then you'll probably never have to, is my general philosophy. And this applies, I think, to almost anyone. If you're, making more money than you're spending, being pragmatic, and you're buying Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin, then you just keep doing that until Bitcoin is money, and then that's it. That's the whole game. It's very simple, but yeah.
Amen. Well, I don't think I can add anything to that. So I'll just say that I love you all. Keep up the great work. And I can't wait till we chat again soon, either another one of these or in person. It was awesome at the conference to hang.
It sure was.
Oh, so fucking good, man. I needed it. I love that shit.
All right, boys. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.
All right, boys.
Be well.
Much love, guys.